The story begins with the fact that he began to tell him that he needed to end everything and the best way out now would be to just give up. He was already thinking that this was the end of his 16-year life and something needed to be changed immediately. But there was only one accident that could turn everything upside down and completely change his life. The mother began screaming that the police were lying and her son could not just die at that moment. It was unbearably painful for her to accept this information, and in general at first she simply did not want to hear about it. After all, this fact would completely change her life and it was impossible to somehow save her or at least help her in any way. All of them would soon enter high school and, in principle, this fact could not be changed in any way. The girl also started talking about how they needed to use this opportunity and not lose it now. After all, it is at this moment that they can say that they have kept it in the depths of their souls for so long and were silent about it. Therefore, they decided to tell all their desires, because this was the best decision at the moment in their opinion. One guy started talking about how he wanted to win every high school title and stay on top. Immediately after this, they all began to say their wishes, because they were confident that they could definitely come true. One hero immediately started calling his mother and telling her that he would never be so frivolous in his life. He also began to tell her that there was no need to worry about him and that he would definitely arrive home as soon as he could. But she told him that he didn't need to dream a lot, but just act, and only then would he be able to succeed. Also, one man was very surprised that there was always a very large flow of cars on this road, but now he didn't see a single one. He immediately had the feeling that there was no end at all, and it even began to frighten him, because it was very strange. Here, at one point, the girl began to talk about how one of their company had been silent until now and that was not normal. Although the hero was simply talking to your mother, and for him at that moment this conversation was the most important. The heroine began to tell him that this was his last chance to express everything that was now in his heart. There was no need to miss such a chance and be sure to do everything so that it could be heard now. She approached him for a very long time, but the guy decided simply not to react to her words now. This conversation was very important to him now and he decided to do everything to end it normally. But the girl got tired of waiting and began shouting that she liked the young man immensely now. Of course, everyone heard this, because she shouted about this fact and did not hide it at all, so of course everyone paid attention. Many of her friends began to laugh at her, because she was the most beautiful in school and confessed her love to someone. Also, one man began to say that he was very lucky, because such a beautiful girl wanted him. But he was also most surprised by the fact that the guy was not immediately happy about such recognition. The driver of the car was driving and could not understand at all why with every kilometer it became more difficult for him to see the road. At one point, he simply saw something that surprised him as much as possible and simply could not believe his eyes. It was difficult to accept the fact that happened to them, and in general it was almost impossible at the moment. The girl began to cry very hard and said that, in principle, she understood everything and could not have anything against it at all. Here, unexpectedly, the car began to slow down, because the driver was very scared and did not know what to do next. The young man began to look at her very sweetly and did not say anything yet, but his thoughts were confused. He very sharply grabbed the girl's hand and began to say that she needed to be much more careful. She was very surprised by this action and could not understand why he did this now. So I immediately started asking my partner what he was doing and why he needed it now. The guy immediately began to approach her and it turned out that he kissed her right in front of everyone. Of course, the heroine was very embarrassed by this, and she began to talk about how all her classmates were looking at them now. But he didn't want to listen to his partner at all and just started shouting for everyone to bend over now. After this, the car crashed and all the glass that was on the windows shattered and could have damaged those present here. Of course, they were all very scared, because they did not expect that exactly this situation would happen to him now. The car was badly damaged and it was necessary to immediately decide what to do with it. Literally a few minutes later the news was already saying that transport on the road was very badly damaged today. The bus was full of students and they crashed very sharply into a pole. They also said that the number of wounded and dead is currently difficult to count. The strangest fact was that the police closed the scene of the tragedy, not even allowing doctors to enter to help. Therefore, so that they could find out at least the truth, their team decided to go on the road and see everything. After all, it was necessary to find out everything that happened there. A lot of children suffered and it was impossible to just leave it like that. The girl was confident in her abilities and really wanted to do everything to find out the truth. Here, at one point, her camera was damaged and she couldn't understand who did it and why. Of course, she was even a little scared, because she definitely didn't expect that there would be any threats to her life now. A group of people began to tell her that she did not need to get involved in matters that no one asked her to do. They started talking about how she was violating the rights of freedom and secrets in general. There was no need to reveal this. Of course, she stood her ground and began to say that she would definitely find out the truth and tell it to the whole world. It was impossible to just leave this one, because it was her duty to reveal the truth and tell everyone about it. And, of course, the guy really didn't like her confidence, and he decided that he had to come up with some kind of plan. I also started looking at the floor and realized that there was some most amazing thing there that needed to be studied. The girl began to tell him that this was some very familiar smell and he needed to find out everything about it. She also saw strangers and began screaming that no one had let them in here and they couldn't just come in like that. The policeman began to tell them that she could not cross and leave the scene of the accident whenever she wanted. This was wrong. Therefore, he began to order them to leave right now and not appear here at all for the first time. He also wanted to threaten them and began to say that if they continued to stand here, he would definitely take action. But at one point the guy grabbed the policeman's hand and clearly wanted to tell him everything that I could tell about him right now. The policeman began to scream that he was in great pain and could no longer endure such torment. This was a special intelligence department and they needed to do everything to find out as much information as possible. He started showing his ID and was sure that he could just do anything in the world with it. This department was a special investigations department that never tried to hide or lie to people. Of course, the policeman was very upset and couldn't understand why they just came here and didn't listen to him. He began to worry very much, but in principle he realized that there was no need to argue with anyone and just admit his guilt. It was a bus that was involved in an accident, more than 10 students were injured and now we are in very bad shape. The man began to talk about what was very strange, because they could not find any evidence against this accident. Therefore, they had to search much more, because they definitely had to find at least some kind of help that helped them. They also found a corpse that looked as scary as possible and it was not what it should normally be. At the moment they could not recognize who exactly it was, so they had to wait for special tests. After all, this is the only way they will find out who exactly it is and how they can contact his family at the moment. The guy began to look at him and he was most interested in why his body had become so terrifying now. A policeman approached them and began to ask if they could find at least anything now. This was important. One girl started screaming very loudly and asking to be let in now, because someone she knew might be there. After that, she began screaming that they were deceiving her and that her own son definitely couldn't be there now. The girl began to beg them to drop her so that she could find out the truth because she simply could not touch her anymore. The policeman started talking about how this woman lived with her only son, but still the accident happened. The husband began to look at her and he really wanted to understand what exactly she was feeling at the moment. Therefore, I decided to simply invite her to talk, because now it was the best decision for her. Every time, no matter where they were, the hero simply hated areas where there was no clue or any evidence. The policeman tried to calm the girl down and did everything so that she would stop worrying so much. She cried a lot and screamed that she wanted to see him now and simply could not endure or wait any longer. This was her last hope and her mother believed as strongly as possible that this was not her son and they had simply made some kind of mistake. The bus was damaged as badly as possible and it was very difficult to find out what caused the accident. Of course, she was extremely worried about her son and simply could not believe what had just happened. Finally, he woke up and she was able to see him, because she simply drained her nerves as much as possible. His head hurt very badly and he simply did not feel or remember what had happened to him. And he couldn't even feel his hand. Of course, this frightened the guy as much as possible at the moment, because this had never happened. The man did not remember at all what happened to him and why he was now experiencing such pain in himself. He lay on the floor and simply could not believe what happened to him, because his head simply stopped accepting any facts. The hero felt maximum pain and could no longer understand anything and take us personally. It was very difficult. The girl ran up to him and immediately began asking him how he was feeling, because the maximum was very worried about her attacker. She also immediately ran up to him and started hugging him and was very happy that he was alive and, in principle, everything was fine with him. The hero was very surprised by this reaction, because he himself did not even have time to understand what exactly happened to him. The husband simply could not understand where they were and what had happened to him at the moment. I also immediately began to ask where his other partners were, because in general I could understand them, where they could have gone. The girls began to change their minds and simply could not say anything to him, realizing what had happened to them. One girl started pointing upward and saying that they were now in exactly that place. The hero looked at her and couldn't understand why she started talking like that now. She also began to explain to him that they were exactly the same until they woke up and they at least felt better. It was hard for him to accept this fact, and in general the man did not quite understand where they were and what happened to them all. The girl immediately ran up to him and began to ask if it could be that they, but it was very difficult for her to speak. She was afraid to say this phrase, but after a while she began to tell him that perhaps they had already died. Of course, it was very difficult for them to talk about this, but she simply had no other explanation before this situation now. The hero simply could not understand what was happening and where he was now. He really didn't like it. He needed to find out what happened to them and why he now felt like he was no longer here. He also began to hear that people were talking to them in a very painful way and could not understand where they were now. Everyone screamed as loudly as possible and it was difficult for them to understand what to do next, but they knew for sure that this was a very bad picture. They couldn't understand where they were at all and there was nothing around them. They were just left alone with no one at all. No one could believe this picture and many thought that they had already died and would never be able to return. This instilled maximum fear in them and they were very worried about the fact that they might already be lifeless. It was necessary to immediately find out everything and do everything in their power, because they needed to get out of this place. This situation looked as strange as possible and they tried to inspect the area, because they were sure that this could help them. They began to look at everything that was around them, and they just needed to know every little detail that could help. They were all extremely worried and understood perfectly well that they might never see a normal life again. There was no clue at all and they had to look for at least something, because this was their only hope for salvation. They tried to support each other and everyone wanted to say that the main thing was that they stayed together and that it would be easier. After all, it has always been easier for the company to get out of problems and at any moment they will be able to help each other. They just had to stick together and not go far. Everyone had to be a bunch, and only then would they be able to save themselves. Therefore, they tried to do everything completely so that no bad adventures would happen and they would all remain alive. At one point they simply saw that some very large thick white fog began to cover them. The guy began to say that this fog was as strange as possible, because it was very thick and it was clearly abnormal. They began to wonder what had happened to them and found it difficult to fully comprehend the entire situation. The man began to talk about this, that a good girl should go, because there would be the largest number of people willing to help her. Of course, the hero began to listen to all these words and he didn't really like what they were saying right in front of him. It was necessary to think very carefully about this situation and not do things that you could very much regret later. The teacher was unconscious, and the driver had completely disappeared, so they simply did not understand what to do next at the moment. There was a very big fog and apart from it nothing was visible at all, so this situation frightened everyone very much. A little boy approached them and began to ask who in such a situation could help find the police. But a person will be able to have very great authority and, of course, he will greatly help everyone in this case. The guy started screaming and told everyone that he was the one who could leave now and find out everything. Of course, they all expected some action from him and were sure that he would not be able to completely defeat all this on his own. After all, you need to have a lot of strength and inspiration so that he can overcome and find out what happened to them. They all began to worry very much, because they understood perfectly well what consequences could happen to that guy. But he only shouted that they should all stay here, and he would go and find the police and finally they could find out everything. He also began to reassure them and assured his partners that everything would definitely be fine, so there was no need to worry. They had no other choice now anyway, so they had to accept this fact and do everything to save themselves. Of course, they didn't know what exactly would happen next and how they should overcome all these fears, because it would really be as difficult as possible for them. The guy began to look at the fog and was sure that something was clearly wrong with him and it couldn't just end like that. It was as thick as possible, so much so that no people could even be seen in it, and this event greatly surprised him. It was impossible that this was exactly the situation, so it was necessary to immediately address it and deal with it as quickly as possible. Also, at one moment, he realized that he could not move at all, and this fact frightened him as much as possible at that moment. It's just that the hero no longer understands what he should do next and how can he even get out of this situation now. He also began to look at his legs and simply could not believe his eyes, because what he saw looked as creepy as possible. Also, his hands began to become exactly the same and he simply did not understand what to do with how to save himself. He began to scream very loudly, but none of his partners could understand what had happened to him now. But everyone knew for sure that the situation was as terrifying as possible and it was necessary to immediately somehow save him now. The hero begged for help, because he knew very well that only they could now save him from this terrible fog. The man begged for help as much as possible and really hoped that at least someone would come running to him at that moment. But his hands began to hurt as much as possible and he understood perfectly well that he could no longer feel more than half of his body. It was extremely scary to guess what would happen next and how exactly things would go for them. They didn't know how to react at all and in general how you can help your old age now. Here he began to shout that they needed to build some kind of plan, because without it they simply would not be able to save their partner. He needed help and immediately everything had to be done to save him and not even think about the consequences. Also, one man began to talk about how he should give away all his clothes so that they could help him. There was no need to have outer clothing on you now, because it does a lot of damage and you won't be able to preserve them at all. Therefore, of course, everyone present began to take off all their outer clothing, because they were sure that this would somehow save them. It took a very long time not to think and to do everything so that they could save themselves and at the same time their headman. They began to make a rope from their clothes that could help him get out of there, because now it was their only way out of the situation. Therefore, they began to shout to him their plan of action, because they needed to warn him about this and so that he would be prepared for any events. Of course, the man was already very poorly aware of at least something and it was difficult for him to grab even the same lace. His hands were in terrible condition and he could hardly feel them, so it was as difficult as possible for him to take this step. The guys began to pull him out and really hoped that this would definitely be able to save their headman. But at one point they began to understand that the fabric simply could not stand it and it would very soon tear right in their hands. The hero tried his best to do everything to save his partner, and he did not experience any problems at all. Finally, they began to see some kind of salad from the thick fog and were sure that it was their elders. They were all very frightened for him and could not even imagine what they would see now and it would frighten them very much. There was almost no living space on him, and he simply shouted that this fog was incredibly terrible and he needed to save himself. They all began to understand that the fog had disappeared somewhere and this fact began to scare them all as much as possible. In general, it was very difficult to believe in the situation that had just happened to them and they simply did not suspect anything. The whole company was as afraid as possible, and they simply didn't know what to do next and how they could save themselves. Therefore, they decided that in order to avoid this, they must find out the truth, because of this fog, their partner suffered. His condition was as terrible as possible and, of course, they could not save him. This fact upset the company as much as possible. The man looked at the fruits and said that they looked fresh, but when they were touched, they immediately burst. This world was as strange as possible and no one could understand where they ended up. How could they save themselves? The guy also looked and it was very difficult for him to understand how he could save the company and what they should all do now. They were all very confused and many began to understand that they would never get their lives back again. The fog was simply terrible and every minute it became worse and worse, so they began to understand that they could no longer save themselves. One guy started shouting to his partner and said that he was constantly crying and it was starting to bother everyone. But he only said that he really wanted to go home and was simply afraid to find out what would happen to him next. The guy started yelling at him even more and saying that he was actually a guy, but he was acting like some little girl. Because of this, he became much more offended and he began to cry even more, because he did not understand what to do next. They were all as scared as possible and everyone wanted to occupy themselves with at least something to distract themselves from bad thoughts. The hero began to draw different words with a stick, because he hoped that perhaps this would at least save him from his fear. One guy came up to him and began to ask what he was doing here now, and why he needed it. He began to explain to him that he needed to somehow use already known facts and some details with the situation. At one point, the man began to shout that their teacher had come to his senses and perhaps he could now help them. But he himself did not understand where he was now and what he needed to do now. His head hurt terribly. He also started asking them where the car and the driver had gone. This situation began to surprise him very much. The teacher could not understand where they were now and began to worry about his students and himself. But he immediately began to ask one student why they were not on the bus and what happened to all of them. I began to worry as much as possible and already understood that they were probably in a terrible situation now. They were also all silent and didn't say anything to him at all. This frightened him even more and he didn't understand what to do next. One guy started asking him to just keep quiet, because now no one can find an explanation in this situation. If they knew at least something, they could have saved themselves a long time ago and did not need to make a sacrifice now, because they were all afraid. Of course, the teacher did not understand at all how to react to such events, because he simply could not guess what had happened. One girl immediately ran up to the guy and began to hug him, because she felt much better this way. Her husband immediately began asking her what happened and why did she start behaving this way. But she explained to him that she really wanted to go to the toilet and was simply afraid to go on her own, so she needed support. Of course, he was extremely surprised by such words, because he simply could not expect that she would turn to him with such a request. It was very inconvenient, but the girl understood perfectly well that she had no other choice now, so it was necessary. Of course, she just really wanted to do her business and understood that she definitely wouldn't be able to go and cope on her own. Therefore, the heroine began to do her business and was very grateful to the guy who now decided to go with her. She also began to tell him that there was no need to come back, because she was as embarrassed as possible for him. Her friend started screaming that there was no need to worry and that she would now cover her and watch the guy. She sat and realized that she had now acted in the most terrible way and she was ashamed of the situation that had just happened. Of course, her friends didn't say anything at all, because they understood perfectly well that this could happen to anyone. This situation put everyone in an uncomfortable position and, in principle, they understood that they needed to be brave to dare to do this. It was necessary to somehow change this topic, because they could not just remain silent and wait for her to cope. Also after this, her friend began to ask what was in his hand now. The guy simply said that it was their headman's clothes and he couldn't let him go right now. The girl was very surprised and began to ask if their headman had really disappeared somewhere. Therefore, he immediately began to explain to her the whole situation that happened to them a few hours ago. They all began to understand that they would have to sit here for sure and just wait for the moment until they all died. This fog was incredibly terrible and many of them began to realize that they could not escape from it at all. Of course, the girl didn't like this answer as much as possible and she was sure that she needed to find a solution to the problem. It was necessary to find at least some food, because without it their salvation at the moment was simply impossible. The girl began to thank the guy very much for agreeing to go with her, but she did her business. She also began to ask what happened to them, because their faces had changed as much as possible. Of course, they didn't want to scare anyone, so at first they decided to just remain silent, because everyone was already very worried right now. Many of them began to ask, when will you not be able to return and will they finally have a normal life again? But no one had an answer to this question, because they perfectly understood that this might not even be possible. Everyone was as upset as possible, and they simply didn't understand what to do next and how to get out of this situation. Also, many of them had already begun to say that they were very hungry and needed to somehow solve this problem now. The company began to remember that they took cookies with them on the road, so they had to find them now. But one guy began to say that now he is no longer there, because at that time there was as little of him as possible. The girl began to cry very much and say that she was hungry and could not stand such a feeling now. They were all very angry with each other and understood perfectly well that they might not even survive and return. The girl also noticed that the guy was eating cookies and didn't want to share them with anyone right now. It was terrible on his part. So he just started screaming very loudly and talking about what he definitely had to share with him. But the hero began to shout that it was his food, so he is not obliged to share it with anyone now. If she wanted to eat so badly, she could take something with her from home, because the heroine understood that the road would be very long. The guy tried to calm everyone down and said that they could die, so they should stick together. They couldn't fight each other so much just for the sake of cookies, they might not even survive anymore. He also immediately began to eat the cookies himself and attack them very much, because he was as hungry as possible. One partner came up to him and began steering him with his foot, because he was sure that he, too, was not sharing it with anyone. They were already ready to quarrel with each other, because this situation frightened them all as much as possible. The teacher had long taught his subordinates that they needed to share with each other, but clearly the children had not learned this lesson. It was necessary to do at least something, because otherwise they would not be saved and each of them would die horribly. The husband immediately began to explain to the teacher that these were not his cookies at all and he really didn't want to take them. But this angered him even more and he began to talk about how now we need to be a team and somehow save each other. It was impossible to think only about themselves, because each of them found themselves in the same situation. Now it was bad for everyone. It was necessary to save each other, and not make each of them feel worse and worse. So he just started talking about how they should put together all the food they have and share it with others. He also started shouting at them and said that from now on they would all obey him. All friends began to understand that the teacher was probably just crazy and it was necessary to immediately do at least something about it. Of course, many of them began to be very afraid and they did not understand what to do next with all this. But the teacher just kept repeating that they must give him all their food. They couldn't treat their teacher so callously and had to think only about him surviving now. He also began to tell them that this fog would still not give them a chance to survive. Therefore, it was necessary to immediately look for some kind of solution, because they had very little time and there was almost no hope either. They all understood perfectly well that they would probably quarrel very much, and none of them would communicate after this moment. But this was not the most important thing now, because they were very worried and did not know how they could save themselves. The teacher began to shout and said that they should definitely listen to him and there was no need to think differently. He also began to call the students one by one and simply said that they must give him all the food. Therefore, they themselves began to call on each other in turns and said that the best option would be to obey him. Of course, one guy didn't want to obey the teacher and just started saying that there was definitely another solution. Therefore, he began to attack him and said that they were all in the same situation and each of them wanted to eat. He was just some useless teacher, so there was no need to be so afraid of him and listen to him. They could not give all the food to him simply because he wanted it, because they also wanted to eat. It was necessary to somehow keep company, because this was the only way they could save themselves. They couldn't think only about themselves. Therefore, the teacher at first decided to simply give in and said that he understood everything and no longer behaves that way. But he said that if he wants to take all his food, then let him come and do it right now. They all tried to calm him down and said that there was no need to do such things now. But the guy assured them that he was not afraid of him at all, so he would definitely be fine. No person can behave like that, especially in such a situation. You had to think about everyone. Therefore, there was no other choice and you just had to fight with such a teacher who did not respect opinion at all. But he was definitely confident of his victory, because he decided to deceive the student and was holding a weapon in his hand. Of course, everyone was very scared when they saw this, because their classmate was the most important to them. Therefore, they began to shout at him to immediately move away from him and never approach him again. They were all very afraid for him and were sure that now there was no need to lose anyone from the company. But the teacher no longer wanted to deviate from his own and committed the same act, which frightened everyone as much as possible. The hero began to talk about how much it hurt him, because these feelings were simply impossible to convey to others. Of course, they were all very scared and began to understand perfectly well that they needed to be careful and not tie him up at all. And he continued to talk about the need to obey him, because this is the only way they can survive in this situation. The man lay on the track and felt maximum pain, but still talked about how he was somehow too confident in himself. Of course, you just started laughing and talking about how he could hurt him just as much at any moment. Immediately after this, he grabbed one guy, but he was very worried and did not know how to react to this. The teacher simply started shouting that there was no way they could save him, so they should listen to him right now. The hero began to cry and simply begged for at least someone to save him, because it was no longer possible to continue like this. The man started screaming that there was no way they would get out, so there was no need to hope for it. Of course, The whole company was as surprised as possible and they began to be incredibly irritated by this. Teacher kept telling them to look around, no one can save them now. There was just a terrible fog everywhere and they had no chance of salvation, there was no need to hope. There are no rules at all now and everyone can live simply as they want, no one can even give orders for this. Therefore, the teacher began to say that he really liked this place and simply adored it. Also, immediately after this, he told the company that no one would get out of here alive, so everything could be done. They all understood perfectly well that there was clearly something wrong with his head and they just had to ignore him. They also all began to want to eat as much as possible, and every hour at least one of them lost consciousness. They were still children, so it was very difficult for them to adapt to such a situation and control themselves. But at that moment they did not yet know that this would not be the worst thing that would happen to them in their entire lives. The girl was sitting all alone and she was just crying, because she was extremely worried and didn't know what to do. They all understood perfectly well that they simply might not survive and would never meet anyone again. Soon a moment must come that will drive them all into a dead end and simply will not give any chance of salvation. Since the accident, the police have not made any compromises and there is still no news of the missing. Right now they could see a very large crowd of people gathered at the police department, worried about their loved ones. Several days have passed and they have done nothing to save a very large number of people. Many parents cried and said that their children were there and it was impossible to be so indifferent to it. They just need to give them at least some kind of explanation, because they couldn't have treated their children so impudently. A lot of days passed, and they did nothing at all to somehow save this situation. The girl approached the guy and began to ask what they would do in this situation. The guy just told her that they wouldn't be able to find the portal anyway, so there was no point in it. But he ordered her to continue searching, because he had a lot of patience and could wait until they found him. The girl began to tell him that they could not hold out for long, so they needed to do it faster. Still, she felt sorry for the little children, because they were not tolerant of such conditions and survival in general. A large crowd of people simply shouted to the police that they must do everything to find them. The girl started screaming that they must find his son, because it was their responsibility. She could not let him go so easily and understood perfectly well that she could not live without her only son. The girl simply watched all this and said that there are always precisely those people who scream the most. But the heroine began to say that she fully understands what she is talking about and cannot easily let go of this situation. The husband only calmly said that there is a lot of fog now and they can't do anything about it. The hero began to look at him and ask who her son was and what his name was. This was very important for him now. They began to explain to him that he was a 9th grade student and was now in exactly that place. They started showing them his photo and were sure that this would definitely help. His mother stood in tears and simply begged him infinitely for them to find him and bring him home now. She loved him infinitely and could not give up her only child, who was so hard for him. The husband just started looking at her and clearly wanted to tell her everything that he was now thinking about her to her face. But he simply told the woman that she should stay, and he would definitely do everything that was in his power now. Of course, she agreed, because there was at least some hope that they could find him and keep her son alive. So they started talking to her and the main character asked, and did she even realize that he was missing? It was extremely difficult for the woman to speak, but she still decided to tell him about one situation. Therefore, she simply began to say that she had one dream that was most surprising to her. It was as if her son was in some kind of fog and simply begged for help, because he himself could not get out of it and he felt very bad. She tried her best to help him, but she couldn't, her body just froze in place. That is why in the dream she decided that her son was in very big trouble and needed to be found immediately. At one point, she simply began to understand that he sometimes appears to her and simply asks for help as strongly as possible. Unfortunately, she cannot help him at all and this constantly upsets her mother as much as possible. His hand just seems to disappear and immediately after that she wakes up and realizes that it was just her dream. She simply cannot forgive herself for this, which does not save him in any way, she simply cannot do it. She simply constantly called for her son, but she understood that how much he did not want and could not get to her. The heroine also put all her strength into saving him, but she simply couldn't. These dreams were as strong as possible and the mother just wanted to save her little son, who needed her so much. Not a single night had passed peacefully for her, because she simply could not live like this anymore, she needed to help him immediately. At this time, the hero tried to somehow save himself and understood that he had to fight right until his last breath. The heroine began to say that she saw him and was confident that he was still alive, so he needed immediate help. Of course, the man listened to this whole story and was extremely surprised, because it was the first time he had heard at least something like that. Perhaps it was the same portal and it really existed now. It was necessary to find out this fact now. The mother cried a lot and began to beg them to find her son, because she simply could not live without him now. Her tears began to fall and in the water she saw him again. This was as difficult as possible to explain, but it still happened. When she looked into the bowl, she simply could not believe her eyes. It was incredible and impossible. Therefore, she immediately began shouting the name of her son, and none of those gathered could understand what had just happened to her. Also, after the mother started screaming, the man returned very abruptly, and this fact surprised everyone who was present even more. His company began to ask what happened to him, and he answered so that he could hear a familiar voice. But literally after a few seconds he was already sure that it had just seemed to him. The girl still continued to cry and was very worried about the whole situation that had just happened to them. And her friend began to say that she was very weak and she immediately needed to find at least some food. The guy began to look at the teacher, who had taken all their supplies and was now enjoying their food. Therefore, without thinking for a long time, he decided that he needed to save his girlfriend, despite any problems. They were all very hungry and understood perfectly well that they clearly could not hold out for very long at this rate. It was impossible to continue to do exactly this and it was necessary to solve this problem immediately. The girl was completely exhausted and her appearance was simply terrible. But the teacher only said that now they had a big fight over food and they had to fight. Although the guy was sure that he would not necessarily give up and would do everything to have at least a little. It was impossible to torture people so much and it was necessary to immediately come up with at least something in order to be saved. The teacher simply began to mock them and wave all the packages he had. Of course, this began to irritate everyone as much as possible, and they wanted to do everything to take her away from him. But the teacher simply began to threaten them, and they all understood perfectly well that they had no other choice. The children just started screaming that they wanted to eat, and he was now mocking them. But he was far from indifferent and continued to do what he was doing before. He just showed off in front of them and did everything to make them want even more. I started eating in front of them and, of course, this irritated them very much and they could not tolerate this. The entire group was very hungry and angry at what their teacher in front of them was now doing. He just sat and mocked them, because he understood perfectly well that they were all afraid of him. Therefore, he continued to eat in such a way that they could see and could do nothing at all now. He just sat and ate in front of them and did everything to make them incredibly angry. One guy finally made up his mind and started talking about how he was very hungry now. The teacher was very surprised by such courage and could not understand why he did this. This fact became the most powerful for him, but he continued to ask, "Is he sure?" After that, he received one chip and said that he still remembers it. Previously, the hero constantly complained to his father about this teacher, because he did not like him very much. I also started asking him if I remembered all the situations they had correctly. Of course, he became very uncomfortable and he did not understand at all what to do now in such a situation. The teacher began to tell him that he would like to eat. It is not forbidden, so it is normal. But he needs to run 2 laps, only then can he get his food. Of course, they were all as surprised as possible and could not understand why he began to behave this way. The teacher repeated his order to him again because he decided that he simply had not fully heard it. Immediately after this, the student began to say that he was no longer hungry and did not want anything else. The husband just started laughing and said that he had character, but that wouldn't help him in any way. After all, they haven't eaten anything for 3 days, so very soon they will begin to lose all their strength. And the 5th day had already arrived and the man corrected him, because he was sure that perhaps he would feel sorry for them. The 10th day had already arrived, and they were generally as hungry as possible and did not understand what to do next. They had to hold on as much as possible, but they had less and less strength left. These were the most terrible days and the whole company understood that they still could not survive without losses. Many of them were already losing all the strength they had and it was becoming simply impossible to tolerate it. They all began to obey the teacher and understood that only he could give them at least a little food now. Therefore, it was necessary to follow his every whim, and they understood that this was the only way they could survive. Of course, he constantly just laughed at them and did everything to make them humiliate themselves. He really liked this job, and he just tried to take revenge on them for all the times. He also began to reproach his father and said that now he could not help him in any way. Of course, they all tried to at least somehow please him and not even quarrel with the teacher. There was no point in showing his character now, because this was the only way he would provide at least some food. Of course, they were all very scared and did not understand how they could save themselves. The teacher simply mocked them, and, no matter what they did, he did not even want to give them a crumb of bread. Immediately after that, he crushed the food with his foot and said that he had missed and did not do it on purpose. He started pointing to the food that was lying on the floor and said that this was the only thing he could offer. The hero looked at her very strongly, and his desire to eat at least something was incredibly great. That's why he decided to try it anyway, because he simply couldn't stand it anymore. It was necessary to eat at least something, just a person who understood that he could not stand without food a little longer. He felt very bad and started eating from the floor and was very happy that he got at least something. It was incredibly delicious, and he had never appreciated food so much in his life. It was incredibly delicious, and he pounced on it as if it was truly his only salvation. The teacher began to shout that whoever would obey him, so he would give some kind of food. Everyone was as exhausted as possible, and they began to understand that they needed to obey him. They had no other choice now, so everything had to be done to ensure they survived. The man began to talk about how he wants to make them obedient, so he does this. Of course, they simply did not have the strength to think or decide anything at all. It was terrible. The whole company was as hungry as possible, and they understood that they needed to eat at least something for such a long time. Therefore, one of the guys simply approached him and said that he was also ready to do this. But his partner grabbed him by the hand and wanted to explain that it was impossible to conduct such a thing. I told him to just stand there and not go anywhere at all now. But he began to explain that he was as hungry as possible and simply couldn't stand it anymore. The hero began to explain to him that the situation is not as simple as he now thinks. He just wants to take power over them all, so there was no need to give in to that. After all, the teacher was sure that they would all now run to him, although this was completely wrong. You couldn't just give in to it just to satiate your body. Everyone will obey him and he will do only what he wants. This could not be allowed. They will simply become their slaves, and he will remain here alone to rule over everyone. They could survive without food for at least some time, so they needed to come up with a plan. The teacher began to look at one girl and told her to take off her clothes. Of course, this surprised everyone as much as possible, and they did not even imagine that he would say such a thing. The teacher continued to order her to completely remove all her clothes. But the girl was surprised by this, because she was expecting just everything, but definitely not such a request. So he started telling her that if she really wanted to eat, then she should do what he said. The girl was just lying on the floor and really wanted to eat. We needed to help her. Her friend was very worried about her and understood that it would be necessary to save her. It was impossible to just leave her in trouble, because she could simply die after this. Although she didn't want to undress as much as possible, she knew that there was no other choice now. The teacher began to look at her very angrily, and the girl understood what could happen right now. So he told her that she needed to be an obedient girl and do everything, or he'll just do this to her himself and won't even give her a drop of food, because she didn't want to listen to him. I just had to do whatever I wanted. That's the only way they could be saved. All of them were extremely worried and did not understand what to do next and how to save themselves. The guy shouted to the girl and tried to refuse her from such a terrible act. They will still find a way out, like having at least a little food. There was no need to make such sacrifices. Therefore, the man immediately approached his teacher and wanted to tell him everything that he was thinking about him now. The girl asked for help as strongly as possible and believed that they could not simply leave her. The teacher just continued to say that she should take off all her clothes completely. He also ordered her to do it much faster, because he simply did not want to wait long. It was necessary to do this as soon as possible, and only in this way would she be able to get her portion of food. Of course, the guy began to watch all this and hoped as much as possible that she would not do this. This act would have been very terrible, and there was no way she could be a little girl anymore. Here the teacher came and immediately started asking how she could help them now. Everyone was as surprised as possible when they saw her, because this woman had never been there before. It turns out that when the accident happened, everyone was confused for a while, so they couldn't see it. She was watching them all the time, but it was also very difficult for her to come to her senses at that moment. Therefore, she finally felt much better and decided to help now her students, who were suffering so much. The guy immediately began to say that now the situation would definitely improve and they would be saved. Therefore, they began to look at the teacher and said that in the adult world it is not so simple. The partner said that he could not think so optimistically, because it would be too easy. There was clearly some basis in this situation and it was necessary to immediately discover it before it was too late. The teacher began to turn to his colleague and was extremely surprised that she appeared here. Therefore, the heroine began to explain to him that the girl was too young to completely undress herself. Of course, the teacher was very surprised by this and began to tell her that she had explained her words. Of course, he started laughing very hard and said that it was just a joke and he would definitely give us food. But after that he immediately started shouting that they would all die anyway, so there was no point. This fog simply could not win and none of them would survive. They had been here for several days and no one had made any progress at all. The strangest thing was the fact that they all did not want to listen to him, that they themselves did everything to die. No one would help them now, so there was no point in playing or pretending to be right. The police will not look for them, because they are simply not interested in this case, so there was no point. They stayed here for 2.5 days and no one even tried to worry about them in any way. The teacher simply started looking at him and wanted to tell him everything she was thinking right now. But he told her that she herself could help the girl simply replace herself with her. She can also undress and it will be enough for him to enjoy her body. Therefore, he continued to tell you the same thing and was sure that she would agree to this. Of course, she was very surprised and simply could not believe what she was hearing now. Was he really so terrible? Because she used to love him and simply couldn't believe it. She immediately began to defend the girl and told her not to worry about anything now. She began to look at the teacher and told him that she would do everything he wanted now. But now the girl started screaming and told the teacher that she didn't need to do this. She just cried really hard and told all the students to look away and not look. But the teacher ordered that no one turn away, and they all watched this process. He also started ordering her to do it much faster, because he couldn't wait any longer. Of course, she was very afraid and did not understand at all why she had come to them now. So she started taking off her shirt and was very worried about what others would think about her. Here at one point, one of the companies began to shout about what it had done and did not do it. The guy decided to stand up for his teacher and was sure that she should not do this. The teacher got extremely angry with him and started shouting that he was going to die right now. But he was as calm as possible and simply assured him that he knew where they were. Also, in general, he has a lot of information that can help him now. Only he was the only one who knew how they could escape and generally survive in this situation, right now. They were all very surprised by what their partner had just said, because they simply did not expect it. The teacher also started asking again and couldn't believe what the guy right in front of him was about to say. But he simply calmly repeated that he knows where they are now and they have a very good opportunity to get out of here now. The teacher just came up and started talking about how they shouldn't drain it, because it would end very badly for them. The teacher, in principle, understood that he could be deceiving and simply wanted to save all his friends, because it was in his interests. Then he began to shout at him and said that no one could deceive him so cruelly and vilely now. Therefore, he immediately began to take a weapon out of his pocket and wanted to tell the guy how it really was to deceive such a respected person. But he wasn't worried at all, because he was sure that he knew the right decisions and their salvation. All his friends started screaming, because they were very worried about him and realized that he was simply deceiving him now. They, of course, began to worry very much about him and understood that perhaps now he would not even survive after this. But the teacher did not understand at all what exactly happened, because the events happened completely differently from how they happened on ordinary days. The guy looked as strange as possible and he still decided that he probably needed to listen to his information. She might actually be able to save their lives, so she had to at least test this theory right now. The girl began to look at them and ask if they really didn't want to get out of here now. After all, that would be great. The teacher began to get very angry, and he could not even believe that such an option now existed. He also started telling them that they somehow looked very strange and he really didn't like it. Of course, they just wanted to hear his theory and hoped that it could help them get out of here. But the guy was silent at first and thought for a very long time about how to explain this correctly and what to say to him now. The teacher simply expected an answer from him and was sure that he had absolutely no option. He immediately began to threaten him and said that if he tried to deceive, it would have a very bad effect on him. Of course, he just laughed and didn't react at all, and wasn't even surprised by his threats right now. Therefore, he simply began to calmly explain that they were stuck in the fog, where there was absolutely no communication and no other people. At first glance, it may seem that they fell into a trap and no one would look for them, but still there was only one option. The teacher began to talk about the need to go closer to the essence, because no one needs very big conversations about this. The guy started talking about how they are now at the top of X, so they need to remember this now. We also had to remember that it was right inside the third transport ring in the city center. Of course, they all didn't believe it and just started saying that it wasn't true and he no longer understood what he was saying. The husband also became very angry and said that he wanted to deceive them and he did not like it very much. The girl began to talk about the need to listen to him, because this story also has the right to life. Therefore, they allowed him to continue, because they understood that there was no other way out now anyway. The hero began to tell them to look at the tiles near the bench and on the lawn, because they were very different. They had to pay attention to this and not forget it, because this information was now the most important for them. The sidewalk entered the parking path, so this information could be very useful to them in the future. One girl said that she didn't even notice it and definitely wouldn't pay attention to such a trifle now. You should also pay attention to the lanterns in the shape of flowers, because no one had used this style for a very long time. The man also showed an advertisement that he found quite recently and it indicated the city of X. This was exactly the place where their accident occurred, so such coincidences simply could not happen, especially in one place. Of course, they were glad that they could at least recognize their location, but this would not help them now. Also, none of them could understand, if they were in the garden, why had no one been able to find them yet? Also, no one had a connection at all. Obviously it didn't look like some kind of city, because this definitely didn't happen. The guy began to explain that this is the most mysterious place and no one has ever been able to get out of it. It's just very strange. Once they can find them here, they have a very good chance of surviving and waiting to be rescued. But this fog killed several people, so we had to be as careful as possible, but not make any sudden movements. They were all very worried that the fog might take some person away again and no one would return him. Of course, they needed to take care of themselves as much as possible and clearly not shake up some very bad stories. One man approached the guy and began to ask whether he even wanted to save them or, on the contrary, just kill them. Of course, they all began to wait for an answer, because they simply could not trust anyone else at this stage. They all began to worry greatly and no one else could guess what exactly they should do next. But they should have definitely used his idea, because now they still had no more salvation or hope. It was necessary to do at least something so that they could get out of this terrible place. Of course, the guy was a little upset that his friends couldn't trust him, but in principle he could explain it. The teacher simply began to get very angry and told him that he could not provide them with safety and salvation now. Of course, he could not answer at all, because he understood perfectly well that he had no evidence of his assumptions. Therefore, I decided to simply say that he would go looking for him himself and that he did not need their help if they were afraid. They already had at least a little bit in their food and this could greatly help them gain new strength and energy. The man began to talk about how he would give everything he needed now. They were all as hungry as possible and just incredibly happy that they had at least some food. The teacher began to say that he could cloud himself only when he found a way out. After all, if he doesn't do this, he will have to be the first to say goodbye to his life. Well, they were all very scared and understood that he was at least trying to do something to save him. But the guy simply said that he didn't have to worry, because he himself would disappear in the fog if he didn't find a way out. The teacher simply laughed and said that he would not leave it so easily and would definitely take revenge on him. Immediately after this, he took the poor girl and began to threaten that he would harm them after this. But her sister began to worry a lot about her and talked about how he couldn't touch her. The teacher simply threatened and said that they had a very good relationship, so he would harm her. Therefore, there was no need to be cunning or at least somehow try to get around him now. Of course, they all began to worry very much about her and realized that he could do anything. Therefore, the guy was confident that he would do everything that was in his power right now. She immediately started screaming for him to let her go, because there was no need to suffer from a lump. The man also began to explain that his plan needed at least 3 people. After all, he won't be able to do everything he has in his head now in any other way. The teacher said that he definitely could not leave, because he had to stay here in place. Therefore, he immediately began asking his subordinates, who even wants to go with him now? They were all silent, because no one wanted to say goodbye to their lives, but they did not trust his plan. Finally, there was at least someone who agreed to go with him and help the guy. Everyone was very surprised by this decision, because they certainly didn't expect him to leave. The guy himself was also very surprised, because he expected everyone, but definitely not him. Of course, he did not argue, because he was simply glad that at least someone believed him. I just asked him if he was sure of his decision. One guy was very worried and began to ask if the same thing could happen to them as to the headman. Of course, the guy couldn't guarantee their safety, so he simply said that he didn't know anything. But they have one small chance and they should have used it at least now. The opportunity to escape could not be missed and it had to be used to the fullest. Therefore, they decided to leave and do everything so that they could now save themselves and everyone. The girl began to worry very much about the guy because she understood exactly how this could end. She even began to cry and hope that her lover would return alive and that everything would be fine with him. But at one point she just started screaming that they shouldn't go somewhere. She was as worried about him as possible and simply didn't want to let him go anywhere now. The guys stood in the place where the headman disappeared last time. They had to take care of themselves. Therefore, the guy simply decided to raise his hand and make sure of what was about to happen. He began to observe his hand and was also very interested in what sensations it would have. Of course, his partner began to worry very much about him and did not know what would happen next at all. They started telling him that this was extremely dangerous and there was no need to take such risks. But there was no other choice now, because this was the only way he could check the safety of his partners. Of course, the guy was very worried, but he knew that it was his idea that needed to be tested. Of course, he himself was very afraid and did not know what exactly to expect now in this situation. His friends were also very worried and hoped that everything would be fine with him. They just started watching this picture and thought that, in principle, they would have time to escape. The guy began to test his theory and hoped as much as possible that it would turn out to be true. It was necessary to immediately check her, and this is the only way she won't be able to find out how to continue saving all her friends. At least he said that for the first couple of meters there was no danger for them, so they could go. Perhaps very strange things will happen there, but one had to remember the most important rule. No matter how dangerous it was, they still had no other way to escape now. They just needed to find a safe corner of the fog and only there they could save themselves. Therefore, he decided to tell his friends that there was no need to go further with him, and he would investigate everything. Of course, they were very scared and could not believe what he had just told them. The hero simply responded that now there was no other way out and he had to try at least this way. Friends tried to stop him, because they thought that perhaps they would see him for the last time now. The husband began to observe all this and really did not want to lose his partner in this way. They couldn't just let him go and watch him go into the unknown. Although none of them could tell him anything at all, perhaps simply because of fear and the unknown. He also began to say goodbye to them, because he also suspected that he might never see them again. The hero himself was very worried and did not know what awaited him next and how to react to it. It was necessary to muster maximum courage and do everything that was in his power now. The friends began to talk to each other and generally could not understand what to do now. They just started shouting his name and worried as much as possible about what had happened to him. Just a few minutes later, one of them began to ask how he was feeling now. His friends started shouting his name and were very worried about his condition. But at one point he started shouting that they should not come close to him. His health was fine, but it was clearly not the best right now. He himself was very confused, because he certainly did not expect to see exactly this. His finger was just in terrible condition and it was lucky that he was the only one hurt. Of course, they all started asking if he had found exactly what he decided to leave for, but the hero could not answer anything and understood that this did not give him very great results. He began to draw some place with a stone and said that there was no need to forget about it now. If anyone goes further alone, they simply will not have any chance of surviving in this city. Of course, for a while they did not understand at all what exactly they should do next with these. If they wanted to find any clue, they had to cross the border. But all the time he only thought that perhaps the wind could help dispel this fog. In theory, he should get to the place where the same people were, but this was as difficult as possible. If the fog could still be positioned downwind, then surely many people would not have become victims. It was necessary to find the answer to this story, because it is simply impossible to define something differently. It was difficult to find out everything about this situation, because it was as difficult as possible for everyone. Where they gathered in a crowd, the fog is very rare and they cannot move at all. If, for example, it splits, perhaps the fog can kill, especially since a person cannot stay there for a long time. It was almost like a fire in the night, only each person was a small match. And the more of these matches there were, the larger the area the fire could cover at that moment. It was after this that they began to suspect that all this time could be interfering with them. In the area, the fog could kill a person, but only while they were there. You just had to make no mistakes and do everything to ensure that every step was correct. After all, if they make even one mistake, they will have to say goodbye to life. Of course, this did not reassure them, but at least it gave them hope of salvation from this situation. Everything had to be done so that they could remember this mysterious fog. Now they had to measure the longest distance, and it was she who would help them in everything. So they didn't turn to their partner and started asking if he would come with them now. He was very worried, but realized that he did not have much choice. Therefore, the guy calms them down and simply said what he will try to do first. Of course, they were afraid to let him go alone, because they knew that together it would be much easier. If they have already come here, they should stick together and help each other. They couldn't just leave this situation and they had to do everything in their power. Therefore, now it was his turn to take the initiative and it was necessary for him to go first. The headman died in this very fog and he was very worried about what could happen again. Of course, the guys began to calm him down and say that they had a new theory. Therefore, he believed them and said that he would leave right now and check on her. They all set out together and really hoped that they wouldn't make any mistakes for now. It was just a matter of sticking together and doing everything as they had discussed a couple of minutes ago. Friends began to say that they would definitely be able to do it, and everything would be fine. But each of them was extremely worried and understood that this might be the last time. The man's hands were shaking as violently as possible, but he knew why he was doing it. There was no need to be very nervous, because they could completely ruin their plan. The man began to cry and said that he did not want to die in such a terrible way. Therefore, it was necessary to act at least once, because now there was no other choice anyway. Everyone was very worried and, in principle, perfectly understood how this could end. The girl wanted to eat as much as possible and she was simply losing a lot of her strength. They could simply die from not having any food or water at all. They had to save themselves as best they could, because salvation was very close. The teacher did not react to them in any way and tried to do everything to aggravate these conditions. He was generally indifferent to their suffering and the feelings they had now. The heroine approached him and asked if he could give them some food now. After all, if he continues like this, someone will definitely die of hunger. The guy was as angry as possible and just started screaming for her to get out of here. Of course, the girl began to beg him to give at least a crumb of food for them. It was impossible to be so cruel, because they did nothing wrong to him. The teacher simply started shouting that he didn't care about the lives of others at all. And the heroine wanted to explain at least something to him, but he was completely indifferent to this. Then she started screaming that they were just children and didn't owe him anything. The teacher was as angry as possible and didn't even want to listen to him. It was just not interesting for him. At the moment, his duty was to save his life. He saw nothing else. He also began to get up and told her that she was probably just tired of living now. He began to strongly threaten her and was sure that this would scare the girl now. He also began to tell her that there was no need to feel sorry for these children, because they did not deserve it. The girl still continued to say that at this rate they would simply die. The hero simply started laughing and repeated to her that he was completely indifferent to them. In fact, they didn't even really know them, so there was no need to worry so much. This food will last him much longer if he doesn't share it with anyone now. Of course, such information surprised her as much as possible and she did not know what to say. The girl simply sat on the floor and prayed that her friend would return alive. The teacher was very surprised when he heard this, because he certainly did not expect it to be like this. The heroine was very worried about him and was ready to do anything to save him. It was obvious that she was having the most difficult time right now and was very worried about it. Therefore, she prayed, no matter what, even how she felt, if it weren't bad. And her strength was almost gone, and she understood that she would not be able to last very long in such conditions. In general, she lost almost all her strength and everything had to be done to at least somehow help her. The teacher started shouting that the guy had died a long time ago, so there was no need to worry so much about him. It turns out he just deceived him for the sake of food, so he had no right from the very beginning. She didn't want to believe it, because she was sure that he would return and his news would be simply incredible. The heroine began to shout that her friend would definitely return and would not leave her here alone now. Of course, he was most surprised that she decided to say at least something to him. This angered him as much as possible and he decided that he needed to take revenge on her for this. No one could speak to him so freely or raise their tone at all, so she broke all the rules. It was impossible to treat him like that, because he was very rarely wrong in his assumptions, you just had to agree. Of course, he also hoped that they would be able to save them, but that didn't happen, so there was no need to think that way. There was no point in leaving this girl anymore, because he was constantly threatening her with the same guy. Of course, she began to worry very much about her life, so she tried to say at least something. Of course, the girl began to worry as much as possible and did not understand what to do next. She began to beg him not to touch her at all, because her partner must definitely return. I really begged for help and hoped that at least someone would pay attention to this. No one from the team wanted to react to this in any way, knowing that it would not be good for them. Of course, the girl was very surprised by this reaction and did not think that she would be so indifferent. One of her sisters ran up to him and started screaming that he should not touch her now. The teacher simply began to threaten her and said that she herself had run into danger. It was impossible to treat him like that now and it was necessary to respect him as much as possible. She felt a lot of pain and realized that she definitely couldn't handle it on her own. Her sister also began to worry about her as much as possible and realized that she had suffered in vain. It was impossible to leave everything just like that and it was necessary to immediately do at least something right now. Previously, he could only watch her walk, but now he can do everything. No one will interfere with him and he will simply do whatever he wants now. She would just enjoy her and no one would even save her, because no one cared. Her only sister was lying on the floor and screaming that she would try to save her now. People were extremely exhausted from hunger and they could not do anything at all now. The girl simply begged for help, but she already knew that no one would do this. After all, everyone was indifferent to other people's mountains and the most important thing for them was that no one should touch them. On the other side, the girl noticed a small piece of stones and knew that only they would help her now. There was simply no other way out and I had to somehow save myself while I could. The teacher saved her girl and began to calm her down and say that the danger was over. Of course, she was extremely frightened and simply did not understand how she could continue to live after this. I wanted to warn her somehow, because he already stood for her and was as angry as possible because of their action. Of course, the heroine was as scared as possible for her and simply didn't know how to save her now. The teacher began to hold her by the hair and said that she probably just really wanted to die. Therefore, he will be able to help her in this regard, because there was no need to meddle in his affairs at that moment. Of course, she immediately felt incredible pain and simply screamed that she could no longer endure it. The little girl was lying on the floor and simply begging for him to let her go and not touch her anymore. The main character appeared along with his friends. They brought food in bags in their hands. The school children greeted him joyfully. The students were happy. They saw Fan Yen with other guys in front of them. Pei showed his friends the package and said that they had found food. Thanks to food, they will be able to hold out for a while longer. Hungry schoolchildren looked in amazement at the bag, which was full of food. The schoolchildren joyfully ran up to their friend Pei Jie and thanked him for the food they had brought. Fat Man approached the main character and complained that their friend Pei had taken all the fame for himself. Fan answered joyfully that the most important thing now is that all people have food. The guy came up and noticed how the teacher was sitting on the ground. He asked excitedly, what happened to her? The girl was frightened and wanted to tell the main character everything that happened after he left. The fan stopped. He silently looked at his girlfriend, then he began to guess what happened. The teacher sat and covered her wounded cheek with her hand. Blood was visible. The main character glanced to the side. He noticed that an unconscious girl was lying there. The fan looked away displeasedly. he realized that the one guy who was with them was to blame for everything. The main character grabbed the baton, the girlfriend fearfully called his name. Fang Yen swung his club, he decided to beat the attacker with it. The girl scaredly asked the main character, "What is he going to do now?" The fan stood with a baton in his hands. At this time, a friend approached the main character from behind and put his hand on his shoulder. Pei, with a confident movement, stopped his friend from beating the guy. The main character asked his friend displeasedly, "Does he really want to save the attacker?" Pei looked carefully at the guy lying on the ground. He explained that the criminal must be punished collectively. The guy adjusted his glasses and slyly said that the criminal should be convicted. The main character was slightly amazed. He did not understand what his friend meant by condemning the attacker. Pei explained with a smile to his interlocutor that they needed to think logically to get out of this place. The guy explained to the main character that people's mood is also very important. Van was sitting in his office. He was looking at a photo of a girl on his tablet. Mi Tao approached the guy at the table from behind. She brought a dish of fruit in her hands. The colleague said judiciously to the guy that the girl could be a portal. Van was holding a tablet in his hand. He explained that there is no logic in determining a person's location. The guy looked carefully at the girl's photo. He touched the screen with his finger. Mi Tao told her colleague that they had not been able to find the location of the students for a long time. Suddenly the guy laughed loudly. He was struck by the girl's words. Van looked at his girlfriend and said that her naivety was incompatible with her appearance. The guy explained to the girl that it doesn't matter at all where the schoolchildren are. Van began to point his finger at different places on the map. He said that there might be people there. The guy explained to the girl that schoolchildren can be anywhere, but still they cannot see or touch them. Van said in a serious voice that first of all, they need to find where the portal is. The guy explained that after they find the portal, everything will be easy to solve. Van very realistically imagined an unconscious girl lying in a hospital. Mi Tao told her colleague that 2 weeks had already passed since the accident. Van replied judiciously that someone should have already discovered it. Van brought the berry to his mouth. He reminded his interlocutor about the real key. The guy thought about the city that surrounded him and reminded him of that time. The guy came to his senses. With his eyes closed, he told the people around him not to make any noise. The attacker suddenly opened his eyes and shouted to the people to keep quiet and shut up. The fat man was scared. He looked excitedly at the guy sitting in front of him. The friend shouted to the main character in fear that the tied-up attacker had woken up. The criminal angrily shouted to the schoolchildren to quickly untie him. Pei explained with a smile to the guy that this was just the beginning. The main character told the criminal that they didn't want to do anything bad. He demanded that the guy not harm anyone out of selfishness. The criminal looked angrily at the main character and explained that he had not been with his friends for 2 days. The people who left ate and drank themselves and then only decided to return. The fat man was amazed. He shouted to the guy with displeasure that in reality they got off very quickly. The schoolboy told his friends that they had indeed been absent for 2 whole days. The rest of the students almost died of hunger. Schoolchildren asked their friends in surprise, "Where have they been for so long?" The surprised fat man couldn't believe that they had been gone for several days. The main character became worried. He began to have some very specific guesses. The fan excitedly realized that things were taking a very unexpected turn. The fat man told his interlocutors that they were mistaken. He added that they did not leave for long. The student answered his interlocutors that they all could not be wrong. Their friends were really gone for a long time. The guy got worried. He decided to tell his friends absolutely everything that happened to him. The schoolboy carefully and very carefully put his hand in front of him. He was worried. The fat man closed his eyes. He was very worried. His hand touched the white fog. The guy scaredly asked his friends if he had already begun to turn into a mummy. Pei looked at his friend and angrily called him a moron. The fat man opened his eyes. He realized that his friends weren't worried at all around him. The guy carefully examined his hand. She was normal and everything was fine with him. The fat man was happy. He shouted to his friends that he was fine. The hairdryer said judiciously that for them, for now, this zone is still completely safe. The main character looked at his friend. In the distance they could see the outline of the city center. Fan told his friends thoughtfully that they needed to continue moving on now. Pei extended his hand in front of him. He tried to probe the space in front. The guy sat down on the ground. He drew a line with a stone to mark the territory. The fat man stood scared. he nervously tried to stretch out his hand in front of him. Hairdryer sat on the ground, he traced linen with a stone, his friends watched him closely. The schoolchildren decided to carefully explore the space in front of them. Pei extended his hand forward. The fat man was still worried as he extended his hand forward, she was shaking violently. The main characters helped their friends, he extended his hand in front of him into the fog. Fun was very excited, he looked ahead carefully as he held his hand. The fat man approached Fun Yen and asked him in a frightened voice to be careful. Pei told his friends that in a whole hour they had only walked a couple of dozen steps forward. He explained that things were getting more dangerous. Fun turned around and looked at his friend, he decided to go forward himself. The main character began to walk forward through the fog with a confident step. The friends looked after the guy very excitedly, they called him by name. The main character was surprised, he noticed something in front of him in the fog. Friends became worried. Fat man asked the main character what he sees in front of him. The fat man fell silent, he too began to notice the outline of a building ahead of them. The guy joyfully shouted that there was a supermarket in front of them, they were in the city center. The guy excitedly told the schoolchildren that they picked up food and immediately went back the same way, there was no way they could disappear for 2 days. Friends around were very surprised, they stood silently and pondered what they had heard. The girlfriend turned to the main character and asked what was going on. Pei looked at his friend and asked with interest if he understood. The main character looked at his friend and said that he could only assume one thing. The girl was very scared, she excitedly asked her friend, what did he assume? The hairdryer told his surprised friends that they were closed not only in space, but also in time. The doctor in the hospital approached the girl lying on the bed, she was unconscious and her eyes were closed. At this time, Wang entered the room, accompanied by his colleague Mi Tao. The medic joyfully greeted Mr. Wang Lian when he arrived. Van asked the doctor if he managed to contact him. The doctor told the guy that it was not possible. Van's eyes lit up, he was dissatisfied that for 4 days there was no way to contact, he realized that the girl may not be a portal. The doctor explained to the interlocutor that the temporary connection is actually very unstable. Mi Tao I asked the doctor if they could only measure a lying girl and not be able to completely control her. Van looked at the patient, he said that to create a portal, both countries need to have powerful common thoughts or memories. It would also require that the brain wave oscillations exceed those of the average person. The girl lay silently, the guy explained that technology cannot solve such a problem. Wang said that the main character and his mother should be the best at it all. Mi Tao asked her interlocutor if there was anyone other than Wang Yen and his mother who could create the portal. Van thought and answered his interlocutor that there was one more person for this. The guy said that everything could be more dangerous if the person suitable for them was actually suitable. Wang Liang told the girl that everything could be much more dangerous. At that time he thought about the guy Pei. The main character told his surprised friends that they were closed not only in space. Fanya was listened to with great attention by the people around her, even the bound criminal became wary. The main character summed up in an important voice that they are all also connected in time. The girl incredulously asked her interlocutor, what does he mean? Fan answered his friend that they were not just stuck in the fog, they also faced the problem of deviation from real time. One of the guys asked with surprise, could such a deviation in time affect their return? The schoolchildren became excited, they wanted to return home as soon as possible. The guy asked in fear if they could get out of here. Fan told his friends not to worry in a soothing voice. Suddenly loud laughter came from the side, the main character looked to the side excitedly. The bound criminal sat and laughed loudly, the schoolchildren around looked at him in surprise. The bandit sat and laughed loudly for unknown reasons, there was silence around him. The fat man walked up to the criminal and shoved him with his hand, he asked what was so funny. The guy fell silent, he looked sideways at the schoolboy with a mad look. The fat man got scared, he ran up and hid behind the main character. The bandit angrily told the guys that they still hoped to return home, he explained that nothing would change even after they found food. The attacker said that fat man was deceiving them all, in reality, their friends did not see any supermarket when they were away. The bandit angrily explained to his interlocutors that they would not be able to get out of this place. The tied-up guy continued to laugh, he decided to tell his interlocutors what would happen to them. The attacker angrily told the schoolchildren that they would all wait to die together. The students were very scared, they decided that they no longer had the opportunity to escape. At this time, the the criminal came up with a baton and brought it to his face. The schoolboy angrily told the criminal that there were many problems that needed to be solved. Pei pointed his bat at the intruder and said that he was the problem. The criminal was scared. He decided that the schoolboy was about to hit him with a bat. Pei smiled a little. He decided not to beat the attacker but to turn to his friends. The student told his interlocutors that due to an accident they found themselves in such a place without the opportunity to return home. Pei told his friends in an excited voice that they were all exhausted. The students listened to their friend with excitement. They were scared. They were scared. The guy excitedly asked his friends how long they could live in this place. Pei told the schoolchildren that there should be comrades nearby whom they can rely on. The student pointed the bat at the bandit and said that even in times like these, there are people who harm others. Pei said angrily that the attacker took food from friends and beat students. The tied-up attacker also abused the surrounding girls. Pei told the viciously tied-up guy that he had crippled their dear teacher Zhang. The student angrily shouted that he did not want such an evil and terrible person next to them. He demanded punishment for the criminal. The schoolchildren got angry. They shouted together that they would punish the attacker. The criminal asked the schoolboy in a frightened voice what he was going to do. Pei smiled slyly. He decided to think about how he would punish the attacker. The criminal became agitated. He looked fearfully at the student in front of him. The attacker looked at the schoolboy. Pei told the criminal angrily that he wanted to kill him. The students around began to angrily shout for Pei to beat the criminal and avenge their teacher. The tied-up attacker was scared. He decided to make a request to Pei Zhe. The schoolboy looked angrily at the criminal and said that he had hurt each of them. Now he must pay for his actions. Pei raised his bat hand up. He decided to turn to the rest of the students. A guy with a bat in his hands asked his friends, which of them would hit the criminal first. The students became excited. They looked at the bat, but no one wanted to pick it up. Pei still stood with a bat in his hands and looked at his friends. The schoolchildren stood still. The student said dissatisfiedly that there was something wrong with Pei Jie's boyfriend. She didn't understand why he wanted to beat the criminal. The main character thought, he couldn't tell exactly what his friend would do now. The schoolgirl became worried and couldn't believe that Pei would actually beat the attacker with a bat. Teacher Zhang asked the guys in fear, what are they going to do? The woman wanted to stop the schoolchildren. The main character ran up to the teacher from behind and grabbed her hand. The hairdryer told the woman in a calm voice to stop. Zhang answered the main character that she was a teacher and she would stop the schoolchildren. The hairdryer looked calmly at the teacher and said that she could no longer help. The main character explained to the woman that she could not do anything. The attacker angrily asked the schoolboy, does he have the courage to hit him? The criminal told the guy that he could hit him on the head. After that no one will threaten them. The student dropped the bat. The tied-up criminal shouted to the students that they were minors. The criminal shouted joyfully to the schoolchildren around him that they would not dare to kill a person. He walked up to the bat lying on the ground. He took it in his hands and wanted to give it to a friend. Pei put the bat in the student's hand. He explained that the criminal was already tied up and there was no need to be afraid. The guy told the schoolboy that he must take revenge. He demanded that he remember what happened earlier. Pei said excitedly to the guy next to him that everyone around him was looking at him. Pei stood behind the student and wanted to explain to him that all their problems were due to the criminal. The schoolboy told the downed student that all his problems were because of the man who was sitting tied up in front of him. The student looked ahead excitedly and silently. He decided to finish off the criminal. The schoolboy resolutely raised his hands with the bat. He decided to hit the attacker on the head with it. The teacher ran up from behind. She shouted at the guy not to do it. Pei was very surprised. He didn't understand why teacher Zhang decided to stop them. The woman asked the guy sternly, what will happen next after he kills the criminal? Drink, I asked the teacher displeasedly. Do they really need to let the bastard go now? Zhang suggested that the students tie the criminal more securely and make sure that he could no longer cause harm. She explained that there was already enough food. Pei decided to tell the woman about what they saw when they left. The student told his friends that their current world is no different from the ordinary and familiar world to them. The supermarket is full of food. The guy explained that in the new world there are empty and clean restaurants, and clean parks. Pei told his interlocutors with excitement that he had never seen living beings around. The guy explained to the surprised schoolchildren that there were no human animals and nothing alive around. The schoolboy asked his friends with excitement if they understood what all this meant. Pei told his friends with an evil smile that in this world they can only defend themselves. Pei asked the teacher excitedly, Does she really want the scumbag to be among them and bully them? The student asked the woman, does she really want the criminal to humiliate them all? Zhang thought about it. She was touched by the student's words and did not know what to answer. The teacher thought. She heard a very strong scream and blow from the side. The schoolboy swung the bat and hit the bound criminal with all his might. The student looked at the criminal with an angry and crazy look after he hit him. The woman looked in surprise at the criminal lying on the ground and tied up. The attacker screamed after the blow. People around looked at him in fear. A schoolboy with purple hair looked angrily at the lying criminal. Pei approached the student from behind and calmly laid his hand on his shoulder. Pei told the guy with confidence in his voice that now the attacker would not mock him. The student felt very weak. He dropped the bat to the ground. The guy was scared. He knelt down to pick up the bat in front of him. A schoolboy ran up from the side and grabbed a bat. He said he wanted to hit next. The guy fearfully called his friend named Van Lon. The guy had a wound on his face. He said that he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The tied-up criminal told the guy Van in fear that he wouldn't hit him. The schoolboy was swinging a bat in front of him. The criminal screamed in fear. Van looked angrily at the bound guy and demanded that he not scream. The schoolboy angrily told the criminal that there were a lot of people around who were waiting to strike. The attacker was scared. He realized that all the students would beat him with a bat. The schoolchildren came up one by one and each of them beat the criminal with a bat. Even the girls who were nearby beat the bound attacker. The students stood in line. Someone shouted that the criminal should not be spared. He stood calmly and looked at everything that was happening absolutely without any emotion. The teacher was very worried. She shouted to her students to stop. The girl excitedly shouted to the main character to stop the students. The main character explained to the girl that the fire inside people can warm them, but it can also harm them. The students continued to beat the criminal. Fan said that the flame of the crowd has become a monster that burns everything in its path. A guy's body was lying tied up on the ground. He was beaten and showed no signs of life. The students stood around the corpse of the attacker. They looked at him silently. Pei handed the bat to the main character and said that it was his turn to hit. The main character answered the interlocutor that he was no longer needed in this state. Pei looked at his friend and said that of course he was still needed. The guy slyly told the main character that they would all watch him hit the already dead criminal. The guy looked at his friend and said that they should be united in such an unusual time. He told the main character that he needed his wisdom. Pei held a bloody bat in his hands. He silently looked at the fan next to him. The beaten attacker suddenly came to his senses. He shouted to the people to stop. The perpetrator told the schoolchildren that he would not do anything bad again. The attacker, with all his might, prayed to the guy Pei Jie. The schoolboy told the criminal that he would now go to another world. The student swung the bat from behind his head to finish off the lying guy. The teacher was very scared. She realized that the schoolboy would now finish off the attacker. The students stood next to us drinking. They watched calmly as he prepared to strike. The guy hit the tied-up attacker on the head with all his strength with a bat. Before his death, the criminal whispered Pei Jie's name with his last strength. The attacker whispered to his interlocutor that he had deceived him. Before his death, the associated criminal said that the guy Pei had deceived him. The guy threw the bat aside. He realized that the criminal was finished. Pei took off his bloody glasses and decided to wipe them off with a napkin. The student turned to his friends and said that now they can get out of here. The schoolchildren stood. They looked with shocked eyes at the tied-up dead guy. The students shouted joyfully. They greeted their friend Pei Jie. Someone was glad that the attacker had finally died. The schoolboy said that it was good that Pei Jie was with them. The main character thought. He looked somewhere to the side with an unseeing gaze. The schoolchildren moved forward very slowly in small steps. Van looked ahead very carefully and warily. He saw white fog around. The guy was happy. He said in a low voice that they had finally achieved something. The schoolchildren around were surprised and delighted. They noticed something interesting in front of them. The girl said in an excited voice that the main character was right. They found something. The schoolchildren saw in front of them a huge city with high-rise buildings. The students began to run joyfully down the street. One of them said that finally they would not starve. Pei warned his friends not to go into the fog. This is the only way they will be safe. The guy said joyfully to his friends that now they can have fun. A fan asked a friend if he was afraid that something else might happen. Pei told his friends that they should relax a little after being depressed for a long time. The students ran into the store. They began to massively collect goods from the shelves. The schoolboy took a packet of chips and opened it. He looked at the food with appetite. The guy said to himself very happily that the chips turned out to be delicious. Van examined the tall cabinets with food. He said they wouldn't eat that much in a month. The schoolboy approached his friend and handed her her favorite delicacy in her hands. The girl swung her hand and knocked the package of food out of her friend's hands. The girlfriend displeasedly told the guy that thanks to this incident, she understood what kind of person he really was. The girl looked to the side and said that the hero in their class is Paige. Yeah. The girl joyfully told the guy that he saved them all. Another student approached him from the side. The main character looked at his friend. Someone said Pei deserves to be first on the course. Girlfriend, I asked Fan why he was acting so distant. The main character was silent. He carefully examined the interior of the supermarket in front of him. Suddenly the guy noticed something very important. His gaze became wary. Fan asked his worried friends to quickly take out their phones. The schoolgirl told her friend that there was no cell phone signal around her. Fan told the girl to quickly get her phone. The students looked at each other. They decided to take out their phones and look at them. Schoolchildren were surprised to notice how their smartphones had different times and dates. The main character told his friends that everything was really as they thought. Fan explained to the girls that they didn't just feel the time shift, but it was really different. The friend looked at the main character and said that she didn't know what this could mean. The fan thoughtfully told the girl with the phone that he was still in doubt. The main character explained to his interlocutors that they were in some other city. The girlfriend became worried. She asked the main character with interest, "What does this mean?" At this time, the sound of a wine bottle opening was heard. Someone decided to uncork the drink. One of the schoolchildren very slowly poured wine into a glass from a bottle. He sat on a chair and slowly drank wine from a glass. He liked the taste. The guy told his friends that the wine from the bottle seemed very good to him. Pei looked at his friend through his glass. Red wine splashed inside. The fan turned to the side. He glanced displeasedly at his friend with the glass. Drink tilted his glass to the side. He asked the main character, will he be able to make a choice? At this time, a loud scream was heard from the side. The schoolchildren turned around excitedly. The fat man was lying on the floor. Underneath there was a lot of food in bags. Some student put his foot on his back. Schoolchildren watched in surprise as one guy beat a fat man lying on the floor. The student looked to the side and said that one guy was beating up a fat guy. The schoolboy, dissatisfied and angrily, told the fat man that he only knew what to eat. The fat guy lay scared on the floor and shouted words of apology. The student swung his fist and shouted at the fat man to give him all the food. Unexpectedly, the main character approached from the side. He grabbed the guy's hand with his hand and prevented him from hitting him. The angry schoolboy was surprised. He looked to the side with displeasure to see who was stopping him. Fan looked sternly and displeasedly at his friend. He still held his hand. The main character sharply pulled and twisted his friend's hand to the side. Fan sharply pulled the student's hand and threw him with a swing into the food cupboard. The guy was very unhappy. He asked the main character what he was doing. Fan asked the student strictly what he was going to do. Other schoolchildren stood nearby. The guy said that the fat man took the tin can from him. He immediately demanded that the student return his food. The girl sternly asked her friend, why did he decide that the can of food belonged to him? Other people could also take the canned food. The guy shouted displeasedly that if he was the first to look at the jar, it meant that it belonged to him. The girl was very angry. The main character reassured his girlfriend. Fan looked carefully in front of him. Surprised students stood behind him. The schoolchildren stood and looked at the main character in amazement. They were waiting to see what he would say. Fan, I asked my friend strictly, have they really decided that they are already safe? The main character told his friends that while the city is shrouded in fog, they have no connection with other people. Danger can appear at any moment. Fan, I asked my friend strictly, did he really decide to quarrel in such a difficult situation? The guy cheerfully asked the main character, what else could happen to them? One of the students confirmed to his friends that Fan Yen was completely right. Pei told his friends that the more they stay in this place, the more united they should be. The guy explained that there were a lot of supplies in this place. He explained that all food should be distributed rationally and in moderation. The main character turned to the side. He looked at his friend with interest. A girl came up and squatted down to pick up a bottle from the floor. She said that she agreed with Pei's boyfriend's opinion. The schoolchildren were very surprised. He noticed his girlfriend Shen Yu in front of him. The schoolgirls stood and looked in surprise at their familiar Shen. The girl with blue hair was angry, she wanted to say something. The schoolgirls said in a dissatisfied voice that their friend Shen used to pretend to be half dead. The student explained that in times like these, a person's true personality comes out. Shen explained that any team must have a core and a leadership team. This will help keep things from turning into chaos. The schoolgirl slyly said that after the last crisis, everyone noticed their classmates' abilities. Shen pointed her finger to the side and said that their core could be the guy Page Ye. The student was happy that he was paid attention to. He adjusted his glasses. One of the disciples joyfully shouted that Page Ye was best suited for such purposes. His girlfriend agreed with his words. Shen told the students in a calm voice that there is another person who deserves this. The guy pointed his finger to the side displeasedly and asked why he should listen to him. The main character asked the student sternly why he decided that he could take the canned food for himself and why didn't he give it to the student Liang Yes. The student got angry, he did not know what to answer the main character to his accusations. The guy turned to the side and began to walk away. The schoolchildren followed him with their gazes. Pei stood silently behind the main character, each of them was thinking about something different. The guy Pei was glad that they paid attention to him, he was able to stand out among the schoolchildren. Schoolchildren walked through the deserted city, there were high-rise buildings around. The girls walked and looked at the windows with fashionable clothes, they wanted to choose their own outfits. The girl shouted in surprise that it was her first time touching a fashionable Gucci handbag. The girlfriends examined the student Shen, one of them said that her set of clothes suits her very well. The Luoshi girl told her friend that it would be very bad if others found out that she took her clothes from the store. One of the schoolgirls turned displeasedly to her friend, she didn't like her remark. The schoolgirl asked the girl, does she really see anyone else here? Another student said that if she is afraid of something, then she doesn't have to take things here. Shen said with a smile that a beauty like Luoshi doesn't need to dress up fashionably to be beautiful. Shen told her friend that if she were her, she would like to appear in front of her beloved guy in the most beautiful form. Luo became excited after hearing such words, she looked ahead. Luo stood and looked at the display window in fascination, she saw expensive clothes there. A friend came up behind me, she excitedly called the Luo girl over, she still stood and was silent. Schoolchildren entered the computer room, they were very happy, someone said it was like a private party for them now. The guy grabbed the mouse in his hands, he said that you can turn it on and play. On the side, someone called the guy Page Ye, he did not answer and looked ahead. The student turned to his friend and invited him to play, he added that they were missing a man. Pei did not answer his friend, he stood and looked somewhere to the side. The guy turned around and smiled at his friends, he said they could play by themselves. The main character stood on the balcony, he looked from above at a huge and deserted city. Pei suddenly walked up to the side, he told the main character that their friends were naive. Fan returned back and noticed his friend, the guy stood with a glass of wine in his hand. The main character answered his friend that he would not drink alcohol with him. Pei smiled slyly to himself, he needed to talk to his friend about something. The guy put the glass on the table, he asked his friend if he understood everything deep down in his soul. Pei explained with a smile to his interlocutor that their friend still did not understand what had happened. The guy remembered his girlfriends, he explained that they lacked knowledge about the possible risks. I remembered the guys at the computers, he explained that hidden benefits can be seen in the adversity they experience. The guy happily said that they were all left to live in an empty city, he asked with interest, what could this mean? Pei calmly told the main character that he should understand everything perfectly. The guy with glasses looked very joyfully from the balcony down at the big city. The guy extended his hand forward, it was as if he wanted to reach out to his invisible interlocutor from the balcony. Pei held his hand in front of him over the city, he was looking down somewhere. The main character silently looked at his friend, he didn't understand what he was doing. Pei turned his head to the side, he looked at his friend with pleasure. Fan responded dissatisfied to his friend that he was not interested in talking about it. The main character turned around and walked silently towards the exit from the roof, his friend remained standing where he was. Fan walked to the door and closed it behind him, his friend was left standing on the roof by himself. Drink squeezed his glass of wine with irritation in his hand, the glass shattered. The guy looked at his wounded hand, he called the departed protagonist by name. Schoolchildren gathered to relax together and live in a large hotel building. The guy, lying in bed, happily said that he liked living in a 5-star hotel. Shen was taking a bath in her room, rose petals floated in the water. Liang was sleeping deeply, through a dream he saw food. The guy told himself that crayfish was very tasty for him. A girl with blue hair lay on the bed and silently looked to the side. The schoolgirl sadly looked at the pillow in front of her. She called the girl's name, Mushi. The store was empty. The main character decided to go there personally and check everything. Fan extended his hand to the metal flashlight lying on the floor. The main character turned on the flashlight and illuminated everything around. He looked closely. He went to his backpack. He decided to hide a flashlight there. The main character noticed something suspicious on the street. He turned around. Fan looked very carefully through the glass onto the street. He was excited. The main character noticed his girlfriend walking down the street. She was herself. The guy noticed that the moose approached the display window and peered at it very carefully. The girl examined the mannequin with expensive branded clothing with great excitement. Lo came close to the mannequin. She really wanted to try on an expensive outfit. The girl stood and looked at the mannequin. She still couldn't bring herself to take off his clothes. Lo remembered the words of her friend. The schoolgirl told her that if she were her, she would show the guy her best version. The student stood and looked carefully in front of her. She thought. Lo reached out to the mannequin and touched it. She wanted to take off her clothes. The main character then has a girlfriend named. She got scared at the last moment. Lo turned around and noticed the schoolboy with fear. Main character asked the girl what she was doing here at such a late hour. The girlfriend came to her senses. She said that she decided to take a walk because she couldn't sleep. The girl asked the main character what he was doing in this place with a backpack. Fan told his girlfriend that he was just collecting the essentials here. He warned his interlocutor not to walk alone. Lo told her friend joyfully that he is always calm and reliable. The girl wanted to tell her friend that if it weren't for him, she herself would not have been able to continue. Lo came close to the main character. She wanted to ask him something. Girlfriend asked the guy if he was going to protect her all the time. The main character was surprised. He did not expect such a question from his interlocutor. The girl looked excitedly at her friend and wanted to tell him something. Fan suddenly covered the girl's mouth with his hand. It was unexpected for her. The main character told his girlfriend to be quiet. He listened carefully. Fan removed his hand from the girl's face. She was excited and scared. Lo asked the main character in an excited voice, "What happened?" The main character told the girl that there was someone outside. He asked her to come closer to him. The main character stood with his girlfriend. They noticed someone unfamiliar running down the street. Luo and Fan became worried. They could not understand who could be on the street. The main character took a closer look and noticed that the stranger had left the supermarket. Fan noted to himself that it was not raining, but on the street the man was wearing a raincoat. Fan stood with his girlfriend. They looked into the store through the window with great excitement. The main character smelled a suspicious smell. The girlfriend asked the guy what happened. The main character very excitedly realized to himself that something was going wrong. Flames appeared inside the store. A stranger set fire to the premises. The main character stood with his girlfriend, looking in fear at the raging flames. Fan shouted to the girl and asked her to bring someone with her. The guy started looking for a fire extinguisher. He remembered that the fire extinguisher was somewhere nearby. The main character looked to the side and noticed that the fire extinguisher had disappeared somewhere. He remembered excitedly that he had seen a fire extinguisher in this place during the day. The main character turned around and ran to the exit. He wanted to run into the utility room. Fan noticed a water tap in the utility room. He decided to start putting out the fire. The main character looked with excitement and glanced at the bucket near the tap. He realized that he could put out the fire. The students in the hotel were alarmed. Someone shouted that the supermarket was on fire. Schoolchildren ran around the floor in fear. Someone shouted for everyone to wake up because the supermarket was on fire. Frightened students put out the fire. Someone shouted excitedly that the fire was very big. The guy with the buckets told his friends that they needed to get water from the public toilet. Schoolchildren passed buckets of water to each other. They tried to put out the fire as quickly as possible. The girl was pouring water from a bucket onto the burning place in the market. The main character put out the fire equally and together with everyone else. He poured out the water in a big way. The fire burned very brightly and continued to spread. The schoolchildren could not put it out. The students were excited. They didn't know what to do. The flames were just growing. The main character stood with his friends. they looked excitedly at the fire. Fan became worried. He realized that he and his friends would not be able to quickly extinguish the flame. The main character did not understand why the fire detector in the store did not work. The main character looked with excitement at his friends. Schoolchildren carried water. The guy came up with an original idea. He shouted to his friends to close the doors immediately. One of the students asked why close the door. The guy shouted displeasedly that they could all suffocate. Pei shouted to his friends to do everything as the main character said. The girl ran to the door in fear and pressed the button to close it. The door closed. The room in the supermarket was filled with black smoke. The schoolchildren felt suffocated. They coughed. Acrid smoke spread everywhere. Someone asked the main character in a weakening voice, "Is everything going according to plan?" Fan clenched his hands into fists in excitement. He was waiting for the fire alarm to go off. The main character felt that he was suffocating. He put his hand to his mouth. The fire alarm sensor has tripped. Water began pouring into the room from above. The main character and his friends watched as the water gradually began to extinguish the fire. The fire in the room was getting smaller. Schoolchildren ran out of the store. One guy screamed in fear that he almost suffocated because of the fire. Pei told his friends in a calm voice that they needed to count their losses. The main character and his friends inspected the inside of a burnt-out supermarket. Fan turned his gaze to the side. He looked at the burnt food on the shelf. Fan sat down and looked carefully at the burnt bottles near the cabinet. The main character looked up. He realized that the fire had destroyed many food supplies. Fan examined the shelves and the burnt food on them. He was thinking about his own things. Lon said in a very worried voice that a lot of food was destroyed. The schoolboy was very scared. He shouted dissatisfiedly that during the day everything was fine and then there was a big fire. Fan answered calmly to his friends that there was nothing to be surprised about. He explained that someone had deliberately organized the arson. The main character looked carefully at his interlocutors. He wanted to say something important. Fan he told his friends in a stern voice that the arson was organized by one of them. The main character told his friends that one of them deliberately organized the arson. Fan explained to the schoolchildren that one of them was the arsonist. The student said excitedly that the food belonged to them all. Destroying the supplies would not benefit any of them. The schoolchildren were talking among themselves. They could not understand who could have started the fire. Fan explained to his friends that the arsonist left evidence at the crime scene. The main character was walking on the floor of a supermarket. There were traces of burning around. Fan explained to his friends that cologne is not a food product. It appeared in bottles around the fire site. This was the cause of the fire. The main character said that the culprit set fire to cologne in the store. Immediately afterwards the arsonist immediately ran back to the hotel. The main character explained that the attacker mixed with the crowd that came running to put out the fire. The main character looked at his friends with excitement. He said it all happened something like this. The schoolboy said that the arsonist was the one who smelled very strongly of cologne. Fan sat down on the floor and extended his hand to the lying charred bottle. The guy sniffed. He said that he was very sorry about something. Fan explained to his friends that cologne evaporates easily at high temperatures. Due to the thick smoke from the fire, his smell had definitely disappeared. The main character thought. He wanted to tell his friends something important. Liang became worried. He shouted to his friend that he completely agreed with him. The fat man, in a slurred voice, told the main character that he now remembered everything. Liang pointed his finger at the guy next to him and said that he was to blame for everything. The fat man explained that he smelled a strong odor of cologne from the student after he entered the room. The guy angrily replied to the fat man that he had unfairly accused him. Drink. He approached the student from behind and said that he needed to be taught a lesson properly. The guy said with a smile to his friend that he also smelled the cologne. The schoolboy got angry. He did not know what to answer Pei Tzu to his accusation. The guy stood surrounded by schoolchildren. He didn't know what to tell them. Unexpectedly the schoolboy decided to run away. He shouted to the students to get out of his way. The students chased after their friend. They didn't want to give him the chance to escape. The van ran after the schoolboy at full speed. He decided to quickly catch up with him. As a result, Van ran up to the student from behind and grabbed his clothes with his hand. The fugitive fell to the ground. Another student stood behind him and held him. Schoolchildren ran to the van. They were glad that the guy was able to detain the attacker. One of the students asked why the student started a fire in the store. The main character explained that the student felt awkward and angry after the incident during the day. "Drink," he said in a reasonable voice, "that all this is very disgusting." The guy was sitting on the ground and was scared. The student was unhappy. He shouted to his friends that the main character definitely did not have good intentions. The disciple turned and said that he knew about Fan Yan's secret plans. The students thought. They realized that the fire was discovered by the main character and his girlfriend, Elk. The schoolchildren could not understand why the guy and the girl were at the scene of the incident late in the day. The students looked at the moose girl and decided that all this was very strange. The guy explained that when he approached the place, he saw the main character's backpack on the counter. The student explained that Fan decided to pick up something valuable for himself at the store. The schoolchildren thought. They looked at the main character in silence and began to suspect something. The schoolboy ran inside the store. He shouted that he would bring the main character's backpack. The guy brought the backpack and opened it. Everyone looked there in surprise. Inside the backpack were food and a flashlight. The schoolchildren looked at this with interest. The students could not understand why the main character put such things in his backpack. She looked at the things in the backpack in surprise. She had no idea that the main character had collected them. Friends asked Fan Yan, what was he going to do with all those things in his backpack and why did he need them? The girl looked displeasedly at the main character. The guy was silent in response. Friends stood and looked questioningly at the main character. He didn't tell them anything. The guy on earth laughed. Friends turned around and looked at him with surprise and excitement. The student angrily told his friends that the main character was really planning something against them. Van came up and put his hand on the schoolboy's shoulder. He told him to calm down. Pei turned to the main character. He wanted to demand an explanation. Pei asked Fan to clearly explain to him everything that happened. The main character was silent. The schoolchildren stood silently around him and waited to see what he would answer them. The girl asked Fan with great excitement, what is he up to? The main character closed his eyes. He realized that he would now need to say something to his friends. Fan Yan calmly explained to his interlocutors that he was leaving and that's all. The schoolgirl was very surprised and amazed. She didn't understand how a guy could just pick up and leave. Pei silently looked at the main character. He realized that he had finally decided to leave. Pei approached his friend and said that they could solve all his problems together. Fan looked at his friend with a smile and said that all this is not necessary. The main character extended his hand to the backpack. He said that he would figure it out himself. At this time one schoolgirl ran up to the guy and told him to wait. Shun asked the main character dissatisfied, did he really decide to leave when he wanted? The girl explained to the guy that they had just lost a lot of food, now he wants to leave and take some of the remaining food. Fan didn't pay any attention to his girlfriend's words, he headed to the side. Shun silently and with a very dissatisfied look saw her friend off. The girlfriend said displeasedly after the guy that she considered him suspicious from the very beginning. Shun said that the main character is always completely calm, as if it had nothing to do with him. The girl told the guy that it was as if he knew in advance that all this would happen. The student looked after the main character with displeasure. He realized that the girl's accusations were correct. The students stood together and looked after Fanya as he walked away into the distance. The schoolgirl shouted to the girl Shun that she didn't understand anything at all in this life. She added that the main character helped them get out of the thick fog. Liang excitedly explained that the main character had found evidence and identified the arsonist. Shun said dissatisfiedly that it was clear why the guy set fire to the supermarket. Shun turned to the schoolchildren and said that it was not entirely right to choose sides in the group. Pei was dissatisfied and angrily shouted at the girl to stop. Shun looked at her friend with displeasure. She was silent and thought about what to do. Pei looked aside at the main character. He realized that he had decided to leave. Shun looked to the side with displeasure. She realized that the main character would leave them. Pei told the main character in a serious voice that he had made a decision. Fan answered his interlocutor that he had no other plan from the very beginning. Pei agreed with his friend's answer. He didn't tell him anything else. The student told his friends that many of them had their own ideas. He explained that he had already discussed this problem with Fan Yan. The main character looked at his friend goodbye before leaving. Pei told his friends that they were safe for now. Someone else needs to explore the surroundings. The guy told his friends that he would respect their choice. They can stay or go. Pei pointed to the side at the arsonist sitting on the ground. He warned his friends not to undermine the collective interests like this guy. The schoolboy sternly told his friends that he would not tolerate this from them. The friends looked at Pei with excitement. They did not understand what to do next. Unexpectedly one girl shouted that she would go with the main character. The rest of the students turned away. The school children noticed that their friend Xiao Fei wanted to leave with Fan Yen. The girl told her friends in a confident voice that she would go with the main character. The girlfriend explained to Fan Yen that it was very dangerous for him to go on a journey alone. The schoolgirl explained to the guy that they could take care of each other if they went together. Li looked at his girlfriend with great surprise. Her words made a strong impression on her. Luo Shi looked carefully at the schoolgirl Xiao Fei and decided that she had made the right decision. The girl thought, she decided to herself that she also did not want to leave her friend alone. The moose was in deep thought. She realized that she had to make an important decision. The girl with confidence in her voice shouted to the main character that she would also go with him. Fan told his girlfriends that he could not guarantee their safety. The main character explained to the girls that it was better for them to stay with the rest of the schoolchildren. Moose looked at the main character with excitement and still wanted to go with him. Shen called her friend a cowardly girl with an evil smile. Xiao Fei told her friends in a confident voice not to even try to convince her. The schoolgirl confidently told her interlocutors that she would never change her mind. The fat man was scared, he thought, and realized that it was better for him not to be alone. Liao decided to himself that he needed to go with the main character. If he stays, then the rest of the students can spread rot on him. The fat man was scared, he realized that he must now go with Phantom. The guy raised his hand up in fear, he called out to his friend in a timid voice. The fat man announced to his friends that he also wanted to go with Fan Yen. The schoolchildren angrily said that if Fatty left, he would no longer eat their food. Liang stood silently in front of the main character and looked at him. Girls stood nearby. Pei looked at the students from the side. He realized that someone else would want to go with the main character. Pei turned around and asked the schoolchildren, "Are there anyone else who wants to go with the main character?" Another volunteer showed up. He raised his hand and said that he would go too. The guy with the glasses said he had one condition: anyone who wants to leave must take with them enough water and food for 2 days. The schoolchildren were very surprised. They were very unhappy that their friend wanted to take food and food for 2 days. The guy with glasses decided to explain to his friends why he wanted to take so many products with him. The student told his friends that if they found more resources, they would come back and report. Pei looked at his friend and said that they had agreed then. Teacher Zhang ran up. She asked the schoolchildren in fear how the supermarket could catch fire late at night. The woman fearfully asked the girl if she was hurt. Pei told the surprised teacher that everything was fine and he was bringing her up to date. The student was surprised. He remembered that the hotel was very noisy, but for some reason the teacher did not hear anything. After a long story, Zhang answered the schoolboy that she understood him. The teacher asked the main character if he was sure of this. Zhang looked at the main character and said that she also didn't know what to do. The teacher said in a reasonable voice that she was simply aware of the situation. Fan explained to the woman that in special circumstances it is better to have a leader. The woman told the main character that they had just settled in, and he was already leaving somewhere. Zhang shouted to the guy in a frightened voice that she also wanted to go with him. The main character explained to the teacher that there are still students who remain. The remaining students will need more attention. The woman realized that she would have to stay with her students. Fan explained to his interlocutors that they would return to the hotel, then they will collect all their things and leave. In the morning, a gray fog hung over the city and the main character prepared to leave. Fan stood with his girlfriends. Opposite him was Pei. The schoolboy smiled at the main character and wished him good luck in the investigation. Fan turned to his friends and said that they were ready to leave. His friends and girlfriends walked next to him. Fan walked down the street with his companions. The schoolchildren watched him silently. Shen asked her friend if their plan would work. Pei was silent in response. At this time, the guy Wang ran up from the side and called Pei Jia to him excitedly. Van was holding a tied-up guy. He asked what should be done with him. Drink with a long and silent glance he looked at the guy tied up in front of him. The guy was scared. He realized that his friends could finish him off now. The schoolboy came up with some kind of plan. He realized that they would have to punish the arsonist. Pei told his friends that they should give the guy some fire if he loves him so much. Fan Shou walked through the city with his friends. There was an unsightly fog all around. The guy displeasedly asked the main character, "Where are they going now?" Fan, without turning around, told his schoolchildren that they were going to the east of the city. The girls walked and looked at each other. They were silent. Xiao felt that she was getting tired. Xiao told the main character that they had been walking for a very long time. She suggested that he rest. The main character explained to his interlocutors that they had been walking for only 3 hours. Fan saw cafe tables nearby. He invited the girls to sit there for a while. The main character asked his girlfriend if she was hungry. Xiao said in a frightened voice that she needed to have a snack. They don't know what will happen next. A sporty girl came up. She asked her interlocutors if she could sit here. Xiao excitedly called her interlocutor captain and said that of course she could sit down. The athlete told her interlocutors that they could now simply call her Qin Yu. Xiao told her friend Luo Shi that she could try to talk to the captain now. At this time someone from the side was watching the girls. He noted to himself Xiao Fei's short hairstyle. The guy looked at the gentle face of the Luo Shi girl and the perfect figure of Captain Qin Yu. The student took a photo of his girlfriends through the camera. He was very happy. The guy joyfully shouted to his friends that it was not in vain that he went with them. Liang was surprised to tell his friend Li Jiam that he was still taking pictures even in this situation. The guy explained that only in such an environment can an impressive portrait be taken. He decided that he would post the photos on his blog when he returned. Li was so dreamy that he even submitted joyful comments on his photo from fans. Liang looked at his friend. He felt like he was getting chills. The main character was relaxing at the table. To calm down, he drank water from a bottle. Fan put the bottle on the table. There was a small piece of food in front of him. The main character was silent. He was very much in deep thought. A schoolboy came up from behind and asked the main character, "What is he doing?" The student looked at the table and told the guy with interest that he was busy laying out food. Fan asked his friend Chen Zhua, "What are his thoughts on this matter?" Chen put down his backpack. After he saw what happened to their teacher, he secretly conducted similar experiments. The guy explained to the main character that they cannot limit the variable when time has no standard, therefore, reliable results cannot be obtained. Fan silently listened to his friend's story. He didn't answer him. Chen said with interest to the main character that he discovered something in the fog. The guy put a small and portable electronic thermometer on the table. The main character said his opinion that he sees a compact air detector in front of him. The friend answered Fanya that he was really very good. Chen explained to his interlocutor that smog refers to various particulate matter that exceed permissible limits in the atmosphere. The guy explained that the fog that is around them in the city has a special reason. The main character looked at the sensor in front of him. He noticed that air pollution levels were always normal. Fan had some guesses. He realized that the fog around them was somehow unusual. Chen reached forward and took the sensor to hide it. The guy explained to the main character that if he were at the institute, he would be able to analyze the components of the fog. The main character asked his friend why he decided to go with them. Chen suspiciously asked his interlocutor why he wanted to go to the east of the city. The main character thought. He didn't know how to explain everything to his interlocutor. Fan seriously told the guy that he should check something now. At this time, Agents Wang and Mi Tao were in the office. They were in a tall building. The guy sat and put his feet up on the table. He looked at the monitors with a bored expression. Van read various news. Messages about incidents in the city supermarket appeared on the map. The girl approached her colleague. She wanted to report something to him. The guy, without getting up from his seat, asked his interlocutor how things were now. I answered the agent that there was absolutely nothing new. The girl said that there was no progress regarding the patient. Van began to peel the banana in his hands very intently. He told the girl not to worry and they have a lot of time. Mi Tao excitedly told her interlocutor that without doors they had no other way to find out what was happening on the other side. Wang said that when the initial fear of the unknown subsides, you need to take action immediately. The guy slyly told the girl that you can guess what their targets are doing from what they left behind. Mi Tao excitedly asked a colleague if he was afraid that their goals would move faster than they expected. Van reassured his interlocutor. He explained that when time loses its standard, there is no longer the concept of fast or slow. The guy sat and carefully looked at the monitors on the wall around him. Suddenly the agent became worried. He heard his phone ring in his pocket. Van put his hand in his pocket and grabbed the device. He answered his interlocutor. The agent asked on the phone in a calm voice what happened. The guy answered the interlocutor that he understood him. The images on the monitors did not change at all. Mi Tao asked the guy with great excitement who called him and what happened. Van jumped to his feet and prepared to leave. He didn't answer. The girl asked the young master to explain everything to her. The guy said with great excitement to the girl that something had been discovered. Van explained to his interlocutor before leaving that a new corpse should be found. The main character and his friend walked around the city. Everything around was abandoned. Liang looked around displeasedly. He said he felt uncomfortable because of the strong wind. Fan examined the map. He told his companions that they were taking a shortcut. The main character looked at the map. He realized that according to their plan, they might pass by a supermarket or mini-market from time to time. The guy thought about it. He realized that food would not be a problem for them. He had other concerns. Fan walked accompanied by his companions. They were all silent. The main character of the show is ahead. The fat man trailed behind him. Lee walked with a camera and took pictures of the girls. The guy with the camera was very pleased. He could already imagine how everyone would comment on his photos when he posted them online. The schoolboy said happily to himself that he would become popular. At that time something flashed in the alley. The guy got scared and worried. He nervously looked to the side with the camera. Did he fearfully ask who was in the alley? The answer was silence. A friend came up and asked the student what happened. Lee answered the guy that he imagined a passing figure. The student replied that he did not see anyone except people from their class. Someone told the photographer that he had already taken so many pictures that he was hallucinating. Lee was still very scared. He was sure that he had noticed something in the alley. The schoolboy told his friends to go ahead. He will personally go to the alley and check everything. A friend said goodbye to the photographer that he was paranoid. Lee pointed the camera into the alley and took several pictures. He decided to move on. The guy was walking down the alley himself. He saw garbage and devastation around him. The photographer noticed in fear that the fog around him was getting thicker and thicker. The guy was very scared. He walked with slow steps and listened. There was complete silence in the alley. The student slowed down and prepared to stop. The guy remembered that before his death the teacher spoke about the fog. Lee extended his hand in front of him. He reminded himself that the fog was very dangerous. The guy looked at his hand. He decided that he had created all the problems for himself. Suddenly the student became agitated. He smelled something familiar. The guy saw in front of him bloody footprints on the ground and on the wall. He became worried. The schoolboy could not understand where the blood could come from in such a place. Lee stood with his camera. He looked at the wall as if spellbound. The guy couldn't understand where the blood could have come from. There shouldn't be anyone here except schoolchildren. The schoolboy looked around very excitedly. He thought that he might still see something important. Lee noticed something on the ground in front of him. He looked closely. The guy saw a bloody camera lying in front of him, exactly the same as the one in his hands. The schoolboy was very amazed. He looked at the bloody apparatus on earth. The guy was amazed. He couldn't understand how this thing with blood could have ended up here. Lee decided to pick up the camera in his own hands. He walked towards him. Suddenly someone screamed from the side. The schoolboy was very scared. The guy nervously realized to himself that there might be someone else next to him. Lee looked around carefully. He decided to find a place to hide. The schoolboy was sitting near the wall. He heard some noise coming from the fog from the side. Some stranger nearby angrily asked someone what he needed. The voices were getting closer. Some man called his friend crazy. There was a loud scream. Lee sat near the wall and covered himself with a small wooden cabinet. A piercing scream was repeated from the side. The schoolboy became even more frightened. Someone's footsteps were heard. Several strangers were running down the alley. The student was frightened to realize that strangers were coming towards him. He decided that he needed to be even more quiet. Young guys were running down the alley. They didn't know anyone else was there. Lee froze completely. He sat silently and waited for the strangers to run past him. The guy even held his breath so as not to make a sound at all. Strangers ran past. They did not notice how someone was sitting near the wall. The schoolboy waited until the steps of strangers died down. He peeked around the corner. Lee calmed down and came to his senses. He realized that the strangers had finally left. The guy excitedly thought to himself that he had accidentally pressed a button on his device. The guy was surprised. He noticed that an image appeared in his device. Lee noticed two guys running in the photo. They were young schoolchildren with backpacks. The guy was surprised. He could not understand how it could happen that these two people ended up in his photograph. The schoolboy became worried. He remembered how a camera was lying on the ground very close to him. The student came out of the alley. He looked around carefully and looked for a camera. The guy extended his hand to pick up the camera and examine it carefully. Lee looked at the bloody camera with great excitement, his hands were shaking. The guy was surprised to notice how someone else's camera had the same picture inside as his. The main character was walking to another part of the city at that time. Someone said that there would be a store in front of them now. One of the schoolchildren said that the boy himself was left with delicious food in the store. He gave only unappetizing food to his friends. Xiao turned around and asked the Fu Long guy, when did their friend disappear? The schoolboy said joyfully that he heard something on the way and said that he wanted to see what was there. The main character sternly asked his friends how they allowed the schoolboy to go away alone. He reminded us that it was dangerous in the fog. The student responded dissatisfiedly that there was nothing they could do, whether he himself wanted to leave. The guy told his interlocutors to wait for them in the store. He promised that they would find Lee and return back. The guy grabbed his friend by the hand and told him to come with him. I asked the main character if everything would be okay with their friends. Fan answered his interlocutor that he did not quite understand how the fog worked. Suddenly the schoolchildren heard a loud scream. They turned around in fear. Someone ran towards a group of students. The footsteps of several guys were heard. The main character and his friends noticed how their frightened school friends were running towards them. The main character and his friends stood and looked at the schoolchildren in fear. Liang asked his friends in a trembling voice, did they just follow them? The guys were very scared, they didn't even know what to answer to their friends. The main character was very worried. He noticed that one of the students had traces of blood on him. Xiao looked at her friends with great excitement. The boys showed concern. The frightened girl shouted that the schoolchildren who had arrived wanted to run away now. Qin suddenly ran up to one of the guys and grabbed his clothes with her hand. The captain strictly demanded from the guy that he tell her what happened. She asked, why is there blood on it? The student was very scared. He tried to force the words out of himself. The guy sat down and put his head in his hands. He was afraid to tell someone that they didn't want to. The main character looked at his friends with great surprise. Chen stood next to him. Fan decided to calm the schoolchildren. He came up and told them not to panic. The main character asked the students what happened to them. The guy in front of him couldn't say anything. The schoolboy grabbed his friend and asked angrily, does he really want to know what happened? The guy looked angrily at his excited friends and replied that he would not tell them anything. The student fearfully explained to his friends that he could not tell them anything. Qin angrily shook her friend's clothes. She recalled that he had traces of blood. Chen approached the girl from behind and asked her to calm down. The captain relaxed. She looked to the side and decided to let her friend go. Qin did not hold the student's clothes. She decided to give him the opportunity to tell everything. Qin sharply and displeasedly pushed away the schoolboy in front of her with her hand. The student fell to his knees. He explained in a broken voice that he did not want to do this. The guy looked at his friends with a frightened look and decided to tell them everything. Two schoolchildren were walking along the alley. There was complete silence around. They were looking for their friend. The guy peered into the deserted alley. He asked if his friend had really gone here. The students moved on. Everything around was covered in an impenetrable fog. The guy said thoughtfully that the fog was thicker for him earlier. The schoolboy suddenly smelled a very suspicious smell. He decided it was blood. The guy looked around and said that he was scared. He did not understand why they had to look for a friend. Suddenly the schoolboy saw something terrible next to him. He screamed loudly. The surprised schoolboy noticed how his friend Li Jiao was standing next to him with a camera. The guy excitedly told his friend that he was really here. He asked his interlocutor why he didn't catch up with them. Li told his friends in a frightened and very weak voice that it was them. The schoolboy looked at his friend in fear and realized that he was completely out of his mind. The student extended his hand towards Li. He decided that the guy had inhaled a lot of fog. The schoolboy extended his hand to his friend. He said that he needed to be brought to his senses. Li suddenly screamed angrily and swung his knife. He almost hit his friend. The guy, very scared, asked his interlocutor what he was doing. A schoolboy with a knife angrily asked the guy, did he really want to kill him? With a burning gaze, he asked his friend, did he really decide to kill him? Li, with a knife in his hand, began to move towards his friend. He got scared. The schoolboy was scared. He began to gradually back away and ran into the wall. The guys were scared. They realized that their friend was completely out of his mind and had become dangerous. Li, in an inadequate state, swung his knife to hit one of the schoolchildren. The student stretched his hand forward and managed to grab the student's hand along with the knife. The guy held his opponent's hand with all his might to protect himself from the knife. Unexpectedly, the student's belt on which he was hanging his camera broke. The camera fell to the ground. The schoolboy did not have time to hold it in his hands. The guy was distracted for a moment. He looked down at his camera. Lee turned his gaze to the guy opposite him. He decided to continue attacking him with the knife. The schoolboy pulled very sharply and held out his friend's hand with the knife. The student turned his hand and hit the guy in the stomach with his own knife. From the strong blow, blood sprayed out of the schoolboy's body. He didn't expect this. The student on the side was scared. He looked in shock at the knife sticking out of his friend. Lee extended his finger forward. In a dying voice, he wanted to accuse the schoolboy opposite him of something. The guy pointed his finger and trembling hand at his friend in fear. The schoolboy fearfully shouted to his friend that he did not mean to stab him. Lee could no longer stand on his feet. With a dying cry he fell to the ground. Mi Tao stood in the alley and looked with great horror at the corpse in front of her on earth. The girl was amazed. She saw an unrealistically mutilated corpse in front of her. The guy's body was mangled beyond recognition. It seemed as if it had been assembled from fragments of several human bodies. The corpse looked as if the guy had been assembled several times from several copies of himself in one body. The girl felt sick. She decided to step aside so as not to see the corpse. Van told his colleague with a smile to move aside to the trash can. He was holding a slice of melon in his hands. Mi Tao felt very nauseous. She decided to step aside. Van squatted on the ground in front of the body. She examined him carefully. There were pools of blood around. Mi Tao ran to the side of the trash can and vomited very much. Van devoured the melon with gusto. He looked at the anomalous body on the ground in front of him and was lost in thought. A medic approached from the side. He told Wang Liang that they were able to confirm the identity of the corpse. Van took the documents from the doctor. He examined them carefully and silently. The document gave the name of the corpse and its details. The guy's name was Li Jiawu and he was born in 2002. Wang said some of their targets are still moving. He noted to himself a fearless spirit of exploration that is worthy of admiration. The agent looked at the corpse and said that the guy had fallen into a paradox zone. All this turned out to be very regrettable. Qin threw the student to the ground with all her strength after his story. The captain angrily and displeasedly asked the guy, "Why did he kill?" Qin looked down at the schoolboy angrily. Tears appeared in her eyes. People around stood and silently looked at the Qin. The girl continued to ask the guy angrily, "Why did he kill his friend?" Chen silently looked at the distressed girl in front of him. She was still in great shock. The guy came up to the girl from behind and said that he would help her get up. Qin turned around and very angrily shouted to her friend that the schoolchildren had killed Li. The captain reminded her friend that they had agreed on everything before. The girl sadly told her interlocutor that she had previously agreed with her friends that the three of them would go home. Chen felt very sad. He felt very sorry for his girlfriend. Suddenly a loud scream was heard from the side. The schoolchildren became excited. Liang said with fear to his friends that he heard someone's voice in the fog. The main character jumped to his feet in fear. He asked who was in front of them. Two guys quickly ran out of the fog. They shouted that they needed help. The surprised schoolchildren sat fearfully on the ground and looked at each other. Voices from the fog were approaching. Two frightened young schoolchildren were running. Chen looked to the side with excitement. The voice from the fog from the strangers seemed familiar to him. Unexpectedly the main character jumped up and ran forward. His friends called him excitedly. The main character ran deep into the fog. He looked around with great excitement. Fan stood and looked around. He knew that there must be people nearby somewhere. The main character felt that because of the fog he could no longer go further. Fan saw that the running strangers were already almost close to him. The stranger extended his hand from the fog to the guy and asked for help. The main character noticed that his frightened acquaintance was standing in front of him. Fan was very surprised. He did not understand how his friend, whom he had seen before in another place, could appear here. The main character extended his hand to his friend. He almost managed to grab it. The Fulon fell sharply to the ground. It was as if something was holding him from behind. The main character called out to his friend in fear. He still wanted to grab it with his hand. Fan was very shocked. He did not understand where the Fulon could have come from in this place. The main character was puzzled. He did not understand what was happening to him now. Fan realized that he needed to help his friends. He turned around and prepared to run. Liang was surprised. He couldn't understand why his friend was so scared. The main character shouted in a frightened voice to his friends to quickly run away. Once upon a time, there lived a fisherman in nature named Fukushima Cathers. There was a case when a fisherman saved a huge turtle on the seashore. Fukushima was invited as a guest to the palace of the Dragon King. He arrived there on a turtle. Before leaving, the daughter of the Dragon King handed the guy a jade box. Fukushima accepted the girl's gift. She told the guy never to open the box. When the fisherman returned to the village, he was surprised to notice that all the people he knew had disappeared. Fukushima walked around the village, but none of the people around him knew him. The fisherman forgot the warning of the Dragon King's daughter. He opened the jade box. Agent Wang looked at the man's body laid out on the medical table. Wang said that for Fukushima one sleepy night has passed, but for ordinary mortals decades have passed. Mi Tao looked thoughtfully. She said she could understand it. The girl turned her gaze to the side at the abnormal body of the schoolboy. I asked my colleague what kind of body they were seeing in front of them now. Wang Liang smiled thoughtfully to himself. He decided to explain everything to the girl now. The agent looked at his interlocutor and said that this is all a different story. Sisyphus was the founder and king of Corinth. He was the most resourceful man on earth. It so happened that one day the ruler Sisyphus revealed all the secrets of the gods. The king even managed to avoid death even after what he did. Sisyphus was an ordinary person. He failed to escape the punishment of the gods. As a result, the gods banished Sisyphus to the borders of hell as punishment. The former king was forced to push a huge stone up the slope to the top of the mountain. The stone was very heavy. As a result, Sisyphus always fell before he could reach the top. The former king must repeat such senseless work forever and ever. Van tossed the apple in his hand. He said that even the ancient gods knew that the best punishment was useless and hopeless work. The agent looked at the guy's body. He said he didn't know what he encountered on the other side. Wang explained that at first, for the first time, the student entered the zone of paradox. After this, the student fell into a cycle of helpless despair. It so happened that he was killed by his own knife from his friend. Agent Wang explained that the student was caught in an endless cycle of death. Wang added that the student ended up in an endless cycle of fear. Van looked at the guy's body and told the girl that what they were seeing now was the result of an endless cycle being forcibly compressed to a single point. The agent explained with a smile that the body is a work of art that was created by time and space. Mi Tao answered her colleague that it is for the same reason that a paradox arises. Van looked at the girl and told her with a smile that she still didn't understand everything. The guy said that the essence of the story is not the punishment that the gods imposed on Sisyphus. The agent decided to explain to the girl what the meaning of the story was. Wang explained that the essence of the story lies in the higher gods who once punished Sisyphus. The main character ran with his friends in the deep fog. There was very poor visibility around. The schoolchildren ran and could not see anything in front of them. Liang asked his friend in fear, what happened to them? Fan ran silently and looked intently in front of him. He was completely focused. The main character ran and fearfully thought that the fog was chasing them all. Li tried to keep up with her friends. She didn't notice how, at full speed, she tripped over a stone and fell. The girl fell to the ground as she accelerated. She saw nothing in front of her. Xiao Fei stopped. She noticed a girl lying down and fearfully called her name. The friend shouted in fright to the girl to get up quickly. The main character went up to his friend and helped her rise from the earth. The main character was very surprised. He heard someone running behind him. The Qin athlete girl called out to her friends in a very frightened voice. Fan and her companion ran at full speed along an alley in the fog. The main character supported the girl with his hand as she walked. He shouted to his friends to run quickly. Chen suddenly appeared. He swung his hand and prepared to throw something away from him. The main character and the girl ran towards their friends. Fan grabbed his girlfriend by the head. He decided to help her bend down. The main character and the girl fell to the ground. There was an explosion behind them and fire appeared. Liang became worried. He asked his friend, was it really he who threw the explosives? Chen explained to his interlocutor that he prepared a Molotov cocktail from store-bought products. The fat man was happy. He told his friend what he did was amazing. Xiao asked the main character, what should they do now? She explained that the fire would stop the enemies for a short time. Fan thought and looked around. He needed to find a way out as quickly as possible. The main character looked around. Everything around was in an unsightly fog. Fan pointed his finger to the side and told his friends that they would go there now. A group of schoolchildren ran together towards the entrance to the building. The main character shouted to his friends to run straight to the second floor. At this time, someone stood on top of the building in a black suit and carefully looked at the people below. A stranger in black clothes watched every movement of the students from the roof. The main character urged his friends to quickly run into the building. Fan turned around and excitedly told his friends to quickly close all the windows and doors. Van frightenedly shouted to his friend that if they hide here, they will simply wait for their death. The main character judiciously explained to his friends that they would have a better chance of surviving in the hospital building. Fan explained warily to his friends that he had a guess. Chen answered his friend that everything was clear to him. The schoolchildren looked around the building. Chen went to the window and put her hand to the glass. She peered carefully into the street. Chen stood and looked very warily from the window of the room onto the street. Xiao Fei stood near the hospital window. She peered out attentively. Chen walked through the hospital ward and told his friends that the door to the toilet was closed. The main character looked ahead excitedly. He told his friends that something was coming towards them. There was an impenetrable fog in the hospital courtyard. The schoolchildren looked out attentively. The students noticed how gradual enlightenment began on the street. The main character and the girl noticed rays of light that began to enter the hospital from the street. Qin told her friends with great excitement and surprise that the fog had disappeared. Xiao Fei looked out the window. She said the fog simply disappeared. Chen asked his friend in surprise, how did he find out about everything? The main character excitedly reminded his interlocutors about the fog. Fan explained that when he went to help the moose, the fog was very thick. There was no decomposition. Chen said thoughtfully that the past phenomenon was not caused by the corrosive substance in the fog. The guy looked at his friends and said that they were going in the wrong direction from the very beginning. Fan told his friends that the strangest thing was the principle underlying this phenomenon. The main character looked out the window. He told his friends that it was unclear what they were faced with this time. Fan very clearly remembered how he met his friends in the fog and tried to help them by extending his hand. The main character returned and looked at the schoolchildren. They were scared. Fan said judiciously to his friends that this world might be more difficult for them than they thought. Evening came. Xiao Fei decided to help her wounded friend in the hospital. Xiao was in the room with the schoolgirl. She asked if she was ready. The friend was carefully smearing the wound on the girl's knee with a cotton swab. Li Shi held back with all her might to endure the pain. She whimpered softly. At this time, steps were heard from the side. Chen approached his friends. The main character told his friends that everything was fine on the other side of the building. Chen explained to his friends that they had checked all the doors and windows. Everything was closed. There shouldn't be any problems. The fat man wearily told his friends that they could finally rest. He added that he was very sleepy. Fan looked silently to the side. He was thinking about something of his own. Chen looked to the side with excitement. He asked his friend what was wrong. Fan looked at the schoolchildren inside the ward. He said he was concerned about their condition. Chen looked at the students judiciously and said that something similar had already happened before. The main character thought. He was wondering how he and his friends would survive the coming night. Fan approached the door of the chamber. He told his friends that they would be on duty tonight. Liang and Chen looked at their friend with excitement and nodded to him in agreement. At night the girls rested. Li So was lying on the bed next to her friend Xiao Fei. Qin could not sleep for a very long time. She sat on the bed and looked ahead. The Qin guy was sitting on his bed. He held food and drinks in his hands. There was complete silence in the room. The students rested on their beds and thought about what they should do before. Two guys ran into the room and shouted joyfully that they had decided everything. The main character and his friends looked attentively at the schoolchildren. The students stood and held improvised weapons in their hands. The guy said it was very dangerous to stay in the hospital with limited food. He suggested going outside and fighting face to face. Fan said judiciously to his friends to calm down and think carefully. The main character explained to his friends that they don't even know what awaits them on the street. People didn't even realize how dangerous the fog was for them. Just running out into the street in such a situation would be suicide. The schoolboy told the main character that he simply did not consider them members of the team. Chen turned around and looked at the girls. The girlfriends were silent in response. The guys got ready to leave. They called their friends ordinary cowards. The main character sadly and carefully looked after his departed friends. The main character told his girlfriends to pack their things and leave with him. Fan explained to the girls that they would have more chances as long as their friends attracted the attention of an invisible enemy. Xiao Fei was thinking about something. she turned to her friends with excitement. The main character was packing things into a backpack. Xiao asked her friend if they would use schoolchildren as bait. Fan stood and was silent. He didn't answer his girlfriend's questions when they asked. Chen explained to his friends that the main character had just tried to convince the schoolchildren, but the students did not listen to them. They can't worry about other people now. The schoolchildren thought. They realized that now they would have to leave alone. The girls went downstairs to the warehouse to gather some supplies. The students looked for the boxes they needed on the shelves and took them with them. Suddenly a loud scream was heard from the side. The students were very scared. The main character and his friend ran out of the room into the corridor. Fan and Jin peered fearfully into the fog. They realized that something had happened to their friends. The main character looked scared in front of him. He noticed the body of one of his friends. The student's body was dismembered into several parts. There were pools of blood around. The killer stood near the guy's body. The main character carefully peered at the stranger. A killer in black clothes stood near the guy's body. He had a bloody knife in his hands. The killer stood near the guy's body with a knife in his hand. Blood dripped from him onto the ground. The frightened protagonist looked at the intruder. He could not understand who was hiding under the black clothes. Fan examined the intruder with excitement. He thought he recognized him. The stranger raised his head and looked carefully at the guys on the balcony. Chen turned to the side in fear. He realized that the attacker had noticed them. The schoolboy fearfully shouted to his friend that the stranger had seen them. The criminal looked attentively at the schoolchildren. He decided to go up to them. The main character noticed how a stranger in black clothes headed towards the stairs. Fan thought to himself in fear that the killer was climbing up to their balcony. Chen looked at the stairs with excitement. He listened carefully. The guys looked carefully at the stairs. They noticed that the stranger was not there. The students decided to split up. The main character decided to go down. Fan rushed down the stairs at full speed. He hoped to see a stranger there. The main character looked around carefully. He noticed that the killer had gone somewhere. Fan looked around. He noted to himself that there were other smells around, besides blood. Guy walked up to the pool of blood. He carefully examined the schoolboy's body. The main character noted to himself that the cuts on the victim's body were very neat. Suddenly, someone swung a chainsaw from the side and wanted to hit the guy. Fan dodged with a sharp movement to the side so as not to be caught by the saw. The main character noticed how a mutant stood next to him with a chainsaw in his hands. It was one of his friends. The main character stepped aside in fear. He was able to dodge the dangerous blow. Fan Ling took a closer look. He realized that he was seeing Wang Ming's mutated friend in front of him. The mutant looked angrily at the main character. He didn't answer him. Fan looked at the monster in front of him. He didn't understand why his friend became like this. Wang Ming raised the chainsaw up. He shouted to the guy that he would kill him now. The mutant accelerated from his spot and rushed at the main character with all his might. Wang Ming swung his chainsaw to hit the main character. Fan jumped back sharply and dodged the blow in time. Wan swung his chainsaw from above to finish off the man in front of him. The main character was scared. He realized that he could not simply crush his opponent. At this time, someone from the side launched a vessel with liquid from behind at the monster. After the impact, the vessel broke and the liquid fell and splashed onto the mutant's body. Wan Ling shouted angrily. The liquid attacked his body. He was wounded. Due to the wound, decomposition began on the monster's body. He screamed loudly. The mutant fell down. One of the friends excitedly called the main character's name. Unexpectedly, the monster found his strength and jumped to his feet again. Fan called out to his friend Chen in fear. The monster began to recover very quickly. His strength was returning to him. The mutant looked closely. He noticed that there were more schoolchildren standing in the distance. Chen very frightenedly shouted to his friends that the mutant had noticed them. The monster looked angrily at the people and shouted that he would kill them now. Chen looked at the main character in fear. He realized that he needed to help the guy. The schoolboy ran to the side. He shouted to the girls to run and that he would distract the monster now. Qin looked in front of her angrily. She realized that they would need to help their friend. The captain shouted to the frightened schoolchildren to follow her. Chen ran along the corridor with a bottle. He was followed by a monster with a chainsaw. The guy was scared. He felt that the mutant was gradually catching up with him. The monster swung his chainsaw to hit the schoolboy. Chen tripped and fell to the floor. He let go of the bottle. The guy was scared. He realized that he would no longer be able to escape from the monster. The mutant was approaching. he was holding a chainsaw in his hands. The schoolboy tried to escape. The guy started rummaging through his pockets. He wanted to find another bottle to throw at his opponent. Chen realized with excitement that he had already used the last bottle. He found himself defenseless against the monster. The schoolboy was scared. He realized that he no longer had a way out and would not be able to fight back. Van stood with a raised chainsaw. He prepared to finish off the man. The man was scared. He realized that now the monster would finish him off with his chainsaw. The monster stood in front of the frightened schoolboy. He shouted angrily that he would kill him now. Because of fear, Chen could no longer even say a single word. He decided that he had no chance of salvation. Van swung a chainsaw and angrily shouted to the man that he would kill him now. The mutant swung his chainsaw. He prepared to finish off the guy in front of him. At this time a girl ran up from the side. She prepared to help the schoolboy. Qin rushed at the student and prepared to protect him. The monster was surprised to notice how the student covered her friend with herself as she walked. The girl in an embrace with the guy rolled to the side at full speed. Van looked to the side and noticed that the schoolchildren were lying to the side on the floor. Chen looked at the girl very scared. He did not expect that she would help him. Monsters suddenly found their strength and again decided to attack people. Qin grabbed her friend's hand. She fearfully warned him that the mutant was approaching. The main character watched with excitement from the sidelines as his friends tried to escape. Fan looked around and realized that the hall was very spacious. There is nowhere to hide or fight. The main character looked with excitement at the students running next to him. Fan called out to his running friend. Chen tried to escape. The main character shouted to the schoolboy to lead the monster into the corridor. Chen and his girlfriend ran as fast as they could. They were still trying to escape. The monster was chasing people. The schoolchildren accelerated and ran up the stairs. The mutant ran after the schoolchildren and angrily shouted that he would kill them now. Chen ran with his girlfriend up the stairs. They were in a hurry. The guy looked to the side in fear. He noticed that the monster continued to chase them. The student felt very tired. He stopped to catch his breath a little. Chen stood and held his hand on the railing. He could no longer run any further. Qin frightenedly shouted to her tired friend not to stop. The guy noticed that the monster was already approaching them. He decided to run further as quickly as possible. The mutant rose upward at full speed. He gradually approached the schoolchildren. At this time, the main character appeared from the side. He swung a metal pipe. Fan hit the running monster on the head with a pipe with all his might. The main character abruptly threw the stand onto the floor. He prepared to run away. The mutant stopped and looked to the side. He realized that there was another person next to him. The monster looked angrily at the main character and muttered that he would kill him now. Fan ran at full speed along the corridor. The monster looked after him angrily. Chen excitedly shouted to his girlfriend and invited her to split up. The guy headed down the stairs. The girl was running up at that time. The main character was rushing down the corridor at full speed. A monster was approaching him from behind. Suddenly, Chen appeared in front of the mutant in the corridor. He decided to stop him. The monster ran sharply to the side. Chen decided to flee and ran down the steps. At this time, Qin suddenly jumped out from behind the door. The mutant managed to notice her. The girl ran to the side. The mutant at this time decided to finish off Chen. The mutant very angrily and loudly shouted to the people that he would now kill them all. Wan Ling saw the guy in front of him and decided to quickly catch up with him in the corridor. The mutant rushed at full speed after the main character along the corridor. Fan turned around as he walked and noticed that the monster was beginning to catch up with him. The main character felt that the mutant behind him was getting closer and closer to him. Fan thought to himself in fear that the monster with the chainsaw had accelerated again. The main character raced with all his might. He needed to speed up. The mutant wanted to hit the guy with all his might. He dodged and the monster hit the wall with a chainsaw. One of the friends asked the main character with fear if everything was okay with him. Fan shouted excitedly to his friend to find sulfuric acid. Chen stood next to the girl. They looked at the main character with excitement. The guy climbed into his backpack. He decided to try to find the remains of the acid. Chen thought to himself very scared that he had already used up all the remaining acid. People looked at each other with excitement. They didn't know what to do now. The monster stood near the wall where his chainsaw was. At this time, someone threw a burning lighter from above. Fan looked in fear at the burning lighter. He didn't understand where it came from. The lighter almost fell down. The main character realized that an explosion was now possible. Fan was scared. He shouted loudly to his friends to run away. The lighter fell to the floor, and after that there was a very strong explosion. The girls and their friend ran out of the hospital building. Everything around was in fog. Xiao looked around carefully. She told her friends that the fog around them was very thick. The girls said that there was a monster next to them. She suggested that her friends find a place to hide. The students walked together in the fog. They looked around carefully. The schoolchildren headed to the side. The moose was very scared. The girl told her friend not to be afraid. The fat man stopped. He told his companions in fear that there was something in front of them. Xiao Fei stopped. She noticed the outline of a large monster in front of her. The schoolchildren were scared. They noticed a dangerous monster in front of them in the fog. The students were scared. One of them shouted that the monster was approaching them. The fat man got scared and worried. He realized that they needed to save themselves now. The girls looked at the fat man with skill. The guy rushed boldly forward. Liang blocked the monster with himself. He shouted to his girlfriends to run away quickly. The girls became worried. They didn't know what to do. They no longer had the strength to escape. Xiao Fei stood still in fear. She felt that she could not escape. The schoolgirl was scared because she couldn't move. The fat man stood in front of the girls. They couldn't even move. La the monster looked angrily at the people in front of him. The schoolchildren did not have time to escape. Liang looked in fear at the monster in front of him. He still wanted to protect his girlfriends. The guy saw dangerous white tentacles reaching towards him from the monster. Liang noticed with horror how one of the tentacles approached his face. The schoolchildren stood and looked very frightened at the building in front of them. There was a very powerful explosion. The building began to fall apart. Liang stood and looked very frightened at the tentacles in front of him. He couldn't run to the side. The fat man screamed in fear. He did not know how to save himself from the monster. Suddenly the monster disappeared somewhere. Schoolchildren fell to the ground after the explosion. Xiao Fei was very surprised. She could not understand who saved her now. The girl saw a strong and powerful explosion in front of her. She was frightened. The students stood together and looked fearfully at the burning hotel in front of them. Liang and his girlfriends looked in fear at the burning building in front of them. Moose remembered with excitement that their friends were inside the destroyed hospital. The girl called out to the main character in fear. She realized that the guy could have died in the building. The moose decided to run to the ruins of the building. Xiao shouted to her friend not to go anywhere, as it was very dangerous. The moose ran forward. She noticed how the main character appeared in front of her in a cloud of dust. Fan looked at his girlfriend and asked calmly if she was hurt. The girl joyfully hugged the main character. The fat man told his friend that it was very good that he was fine. Liang turned around and asked the main character, "Where did the guy Chen and his girlfriend Qin go?" The main character thought. He clenched his hand into a fist and did not know what to answer his friend. Fan decided to tell his interlocutor about the fate of his friends. The main character at the last moment shouted to his friends to run away as the building would explode. After a powerful explosion, the guy was thrown to the side. He did not see what happened to the schoolchildren. Fan was lying on the ground unconscious. He began to have difficulty coming to his senses. The schoolboy woke up. He did not know whether his friends were able to escape. He was in pain. Fan got up after the explosion and sat down on the ground. He decided to look around. The main character excitedly called his friends by name. There was a fire all around. Fan noticed how another strong explosion was heard from the ruins of the building. The schoolboy fearfully realized to himself that the hospital was beginning to collapse. The main character accelerated and ran to the side with all his might to protect himself. The student realized that his friends remained inside. There was no way he could help them. There was another very strong explosion. Clouds of fire appeared from behind. Fan, with a worried look, explained to his friends what had happened to the other schoolchildren. Xiao Fei happily looked at her friend and said that they could try to find the schoolchildren. The fat man reminded that the guy is very smart, and the Qin girl is very athletic. The main character thought. He realized that they could go and look for schoolchildren. The students walked through the ruins and looked around. They called their friends by name. The fat man said dissatisfiedly that he could not find any traces of his friends. Xiao looked around carefully. The main character thought. He didn't know what to do in such a situation. Fan said with excitement to his friends that they should leave here as soon as possible. They will leave a backpack with the necessary food. If their friends are alive, then they will find a way to get out to the east of the city. The schoolchildren listened to their friend with excitement. They decided to agree. The students left a backpack with food. they turned around and began to leave. After some time, someone approached the bag of food and looked at it carefully. The students walked around the city and looked at it in surprise. They were surprised. The guy looked around, he did not understand how this could be possible. A student in the store looked and noticed that the burnt shelves had turned into new ones. The schoolchildren could not understand how the store could be restored after the fire. Van thoughtfully told his friends that the charred shelves were just part of the incredible. One of the disciples said observantly that the food that they had taken away earlier had also been replenished. The girl Shan entered the store. She said she checked them all. The student slyly told her friends that everything in the shopping center had been updated. The student looked at the shelves with goods. He said that it was as if someone was making a replenishment for them. The guy thought and was amazed. He decided to understand what it all meant. The guy began to remember how they used to collect purchases in stores. The schoolboy said in a surprised voice to his friends that they now have endless supplies. The students were happy. One of them said that now there is no need to worry about food. Pei stood thoughtfully at the counter. One of the guys walked up to his friend Pei Jia and put his hand on his shoulder. The guy told the student that they needed to step aside and talk about something. Pei looked displeased at his interlocutor and said that he could talk. A schoolboy with a cigarette told his interlocutor that he wanted to talk to him alone. Pei looked after his friend. He decided to go outside with him. The student sat down with a friend on a bench. He said that he could tell him everything. The guy turned to his interlocutor and said that he would tell him everything. A schoolboy pulled a piece of paper out of a glass at night and was the first to stand watch. Before this, Pei told his friends that they would all be on duty in turns. There were folded pieces of paper in the glass. The person on duty will be the one who pulls out a piece of paper with the word security. One of the students took a piece of paper out of the glass. He was to become a guard for the night. The guy looked attentively and with a searching gaze at the piece of paper in front of him. The student at first thought he was unlucky, but then he took it very seriously. Pei asked his friend with interest whether the supermarket had changed when he was on duty there. The guy said that the burnt shelves were the same. There was no missing food either. In the middle of the night, the guard decided to leave and go to the toilet for a while. When the guy returned to the supermarket, everything there had changed a lot. The schoolboy was surprised. He carefully examined the store windows in front of him. The guy looked at the supermarket and noticed that everything was in order there. The shelves were full of goods. Pei asked his friend with interest, had the supermarket really changed in just a couple of minutes? The student replied that he himself was in shock. The guy slyly answered his interlocutor that he could guess what happened. Pei looked at his friend very carefully. He realized that he had guessed something. The schoolboy prepared to get up from his seat. He told his friend that he knew everything. Pei explained to the interlocutor that he had provided important information. He asked his friend if he had told anyone else about this. The guy confidently answered the schoolboy that he didn't tell anyone else about it. The student told his interlocutor that he needed to keep quiet about everything that had happened for now. Pei patted his friend on the shoulder. He said that if they told other students about everything, unnecessary panic would begin. The student looked at Pei Jia. He decided to turn to him with some request. The guy told his interlocutor that he had done the task very well. The student served his hands, but still did not dare to ask his friend for something. The guy looked at his interlocutor and said slyly that he should know what he meant. Pei told the other person that he would meet him this evening. Pei said with a parting smile to the guy that they would talk in more detail in the evening.